The Legiones Astartes waged war across the stars in order to unite humanity for a prosperous future. Battle won through the toil of millions of soldiers drawn from countless planets. To ascend to the stature of an Astartes above mortal men is an honor of immense proportions, and to lead as a captain, nothing short of a miracle. For today, we shall elucidate the seneschals of the Space Marines, who through martial skill and tactical genius paved the way for the most lauded victories of the Great Crusade. The paragons of the Legiones Astartes. The first captains.
In raising these men to watch over mankind, we have bred a legion of Inhumans, whose sole purpose is to defend that which they no longer understand. Their duty borne with pride, their curse carried with grace. But let it never be forgotten what we have done to Caliban's finest sons. Unending imperial ambition has not bred warriors with the warm hearts of men, but angels with the cold hearts of weapons. No soul so changed will recover what was lost. No weapon so savage can be wielded without cost. The advisors, families, and confidants of the Primarchs of the Imperium are instrumental in their influence over the sons of the Emperor. Some raised the discovered sons of the Emperor as adopted children, others enslaving and capitalizing on their natural strengths and abilities. And while some now lay cold in their graves, some still live with the vindication or shame of their actions in the shadowy corners of the galaxy, with none more conflicted than the guardian of the Lion of Caliban, Luther. Born on the death world of Caliban, at the northern fringes of the Eye of Terror, Luther would devote his early life as a knight of the techno-medieval knights of the planet. Rising to a knight of acclaim within the Order, Luther would marry a woman named Fiona, and for 2 years defend his people and live happily with his wife. Siring a daughter, Luther would watch his wife Fiona perish during labor, and lose his new child in the process. Widowed and roaming the forests of Caliban for monsters to slay, Luther would grieve for the loss of his family, yet in time foster a new child. Half a Terran Standard year later, a feral young man would be found within the wilds. Surviving for a solar decade within the wilds with no aid, the knights would be alarmed at the sight of the feral youth whom had seemingly staved off and killed the beasts of the forests. Despite the misgivings of his fellow band of knights, Luther would save the young man and raise him within his household. Naming the feral man Lion L. Johnson, translated to Gothic as Lion, Son of the Forest. Luther would mentor the young boy in the ways of civilization and the qualities of a knight within the monastery of Alderuk. Learning quickly, the Lion would learn to speak fluently, saw Luther and his protege complementing one another's temperaments and skills to become a formidable pair. His relationship to the Lion changing from father, teacher, friend, and finally brother in the span of only a few years due to the Primarch's accelerated aging. And in time, Lionel Johnson would join Tsar Luther as a Knight of the Order. Due to Caliban's proximity to the Eye of Terror, the planet would be infested with warp-mutated creatures known as beasts that roam the forests of the Death World. With Luther and the Lion's exploits gaining a reputation, young men of Caliban would flock to join the Order of Knights until their numbers swelled. With the Order now at peak strength, the Lion would, with Luther's aid and oratory, beseech the Order's leaders to wage a crusade against the beasts of Caliban. Set to purge the planet of the foul creatures, the Lion would submit his strategies and plans for the liberation of Caliban from their tormentors. With Luther's pedigree as the man with the highest accomplished quests against the beasts of Caliban, he would show support for the Lion's crusade. For if not for the Lion, Luther would without a doubt be the most storied hero of Caliban's current era. Seen as a champion to his people, the Order and its citizenry would show their support for Luther, and therefore the Lion. Bereft of jealousy or spite for his own fading legend in the shadow of the Lion, Luther would devote all his energies to helping his stalwart brothers campaign. Within 10 standard years, Johnson's culling of the beasts of Caliban would prove successful, and the Order would continue to grow in size with the victory of the Lion and his confidant, Luthor. Incorporating other knightly houses into the Order, the Band of Warriors would become the single most powerful organization within Caliban, with exception to their closest rivals, the Knights of Lupus. Yet the Knights of Lupus would resent the Order's culling of the beasts, as they would capture and train the foul creatures for their own purposes. And with the rapid change of the planet's civilization, the Knights of Lupus would declare war against the Order. Over the decade of warring against the beasts of Caliban, it had become rare in the extreme for the knightly houses to fight amongst themselves. Yet with open war declared between the Order and the Knights of Lupus, Caliban would postpone its great peace won with the slaying of the beasts of the forests. An instance typically seen only once every generation, the war would culminate with the siege of the Knights of Lupus castle stronghold. The Lion would launch a diversionary assault of the northern gate, while Tsar Luthor would flank the castle's defenses and strike. After hours of brutal slaughter, incurring massive casualties on both sides, the Order would breach the castle walls. Confronted by caged beasts within the castle courtyard, the knights would be horrified that any knightly house would use the beasts against their fellow man. The Knights of Lupus commander, Lord Sartana, would unleash the beasts upon the Order. Caught in a bitter struggle to survive against the combined assortments of beasts, the battle would grow even bloodier with their fangs and claws added to the fray. Despite several losses, the Order would prevail, and with the Knights of Lupus retreating further into the castle, the Order would show no mercy in cutting down their number. With Lord Sartana ending his own life with his hunting blade, the Knights of Lupus would be decimated. Yet as the Knights of the Order rode back to Aldoruk, the surviving men would chant glories and honors in the name of the Lion. For the first time in his life, Luthor would feel a faint twinge of jealousy, and within the subsequent days of toil, the Order would hunt the remaining beasts of the forest to near extinction, claiming fewer and fewer pelts and trophies of their hunts until the Lion's grand vision would be achieved. But Caliban would not be spared further changes, with the timely arrival of the Emperor of Mankind. The Astartes of the First Legion would make planetfall, and with their discovery of the Knights of Caliban, an audience would be made between the Emperor and his long-lost son. Feeling a deep connection between himself and his father, the Lion would swear fealty to the Emperor. Given command of the First Legion of the Adeptus Astartes, the Lion would become one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. Incorporating his own knights into the First Legion, Caliban would once again be transformed by men not native to the planet's soil. At the behest of the Lion, the knightly orders would be disbanded, and aspirants would be drawn from the remnants to join the Legion. Such swift changes would be met with dissent by some within the Order, with some malcontents plotting to assassinate the Emperor. Thwarted by the Astartes, Caliban's populace would relinquish all rights to object, and the surface of Caliban would be transformed from forests into industrial factories and training grounds of the Imperium. Implanting the aspirants of the newly codified Dark Angels Legion, Luthor would be unable to undergo the gene seed implantations of the Astartes due to his age. This would be true of many Knights of the Order, and as such, Luthor and his senior brethren would instead undergo extensive surgical and biomechanical procedures as a compromise. Although not as potent as full gene seed implantation, Luthor would receive enhanced stamina, strength, and superhuman reflexes as a result of his procedures. Now inferior in scale and attributes in comparison to many of his junior knights that now loomed larger in their ceramite, Luthor's self-doubts and jealousy would take another small, yet significant toll. Yet Luthor would remain as the second in command to the Lion, and as a result, the Dark Angels Legion. His position cemented due to his newly forged ideals of the Imperium and his own countless battle honors and accomplishments. Yet deep down, Luthor would be incapable of nurturing the slowly growing resentment within him, the man whom figuratively lived in the shadow of his Primarch, and literally lived in the shadow of his battle brothers. Deployed to the Great Crusade, the Dark Angels under the command of the Lion would be swift in their persecution of compliance throughout the galaxy. However, with their arrival at the planet of Sarosh, the Dark Angels Legion would be tested in their skills of diplomacy. Discovering the planet's governing bodies to worship false gods, the Lion would slay the planetary governor and hasten the planet's response to their intrusion. Unaware of his Primarch's actions, Luthor, alongside the former Knight and Librarian of the Dark Angels, Zahariel, would uncover an atomic weapon now smuggled aboard the Dark Angels' flagship, the Invincible Reason. Seeing an opportunity to assume command of the Legion, Luthor would confide in Zahariel that should the Lion perish, they would have no obstacles in reviving Caliban's glorious past and steering the planet to a brighter future. The dam of his pride bursting, Luthor would spill forth his resentment of the Lion and the ruination of his homeworld. Attempting to walk away from the weapon, Luthor's conscience would best him and resolve him to cast the device from the ship's embarkation deck. The bomb would detonate in the void of space, yet damage the flagship. The Lion's life would be saved. Quelling the planet of Sarosh for their treachery, Luthor's absence from the battle would be observed. With the Lion returning to the flagship, he would dispatch Luthor to return to Caliban in order to oversee the recruitment of new Astartes into the Legion. Alongside hundreds of Astartes who had been found wanting during the pacification of Sarosh, the Lion would deem them unfit to fight alongside him in the coming battles of the Crusade. Exiled to his homeworld, Luthor would stew in his bitterness and resentment of the Lion. He would have been the greatest hero in Caliban's history had it not been for the Lion. With almost the entirety of the Astartes returned to Caliban being natives to the planet, it would not escape Luthor's notice that the once proud Knights of the Order were being punished rather than the Legion's Terran-born battle brothers. Allying with their native-born leader, the Dark Angels of Caliban would conspire to preserve their homeworld and seek retribution against their Primarch. For 50 Terran years, Luthor would succeed in his training and recruitment of new Astartes into the Legion, yet Caliban would once more be plagued by the resurgence of the warp-mutated beasts that had once held dominion over the planet. Hearing of War Master Horus Lupercal's secession from the Imperium, Luthor would declare Caliban's independence from the conflict and abstain from pledging his forces to either side of the conflict. Yet with the Emperor's victory against the traitors and subsequent interring upon the Golden Throne, the Dark Angels under the command of Lionel Johnson would return one final time to Caliban. Upon their arrival, Luthor would strike. Enraged, the Lion would command his fleet to bombard the surface of his once homeworld and lead a strike force to confront his treacherous sons within the fortress monastery of Aldoruk. The Lion would find his fallen Astartes tainted by the ruinous powers. With Luthor now ascended to a champion of chaos, he would be a match to the Primarch after so many years living within his shadow. Matched in strength and martial prowess, Luthor would be wounded by the Lion, but still manage to mortally wound his former brother-in-arms. As the scales fell from his eyes and Luthor realized what he had done, he would be unable to end the life of his dearest friend. Caliban would be consumed by the warp, with the fallen Dark Angels escaping into the void. Yet Luthor would be captured and imprisoned within the remnants of Caliban's might, the Rock. Constructing a vast vessel around Aldoruk and the remnants of Caliban's Earth, the Rock would harbor their secret prisoner, Luthor. Concealing their homeworld's destruction from the wider Imperium, the Dark Angels would bear their Legion's shame. Imprisoned for 10 millennia, Luthor would be interrogated by the many Supreme Grand Masters of the Legion within his rune-warded stasis field. Descending into small bouts of deranged madness, Luthor would be used by the Legion as its dark oracle to divine both their shameful past and possible future. Extracting fragments of vital information from the husk of the once great knight, Luthor divulged fragments of information on the members of the fallen angels and the lost relics of the Legion. His mad ravings, confessions and rants, repeating his conviction that one day the Lion shall return and absolve his once proud mentor of his sins. Yet with the birth of the Great Rift, following Abaddon the Despoiler's 13th Black Crusade, the Rock would be cut off from the wider Imperium. Invaded by demonic forces led by the fallen angel demon prince, Marbas, Luthor would be freed from his millennia of imprisonment. Known only to the current Supreme Grand Master of the Dark Angels, Azrael, Luthor's escape marks his potential return, commanding the fallen angels to enact his revenge against his brethren. Even the straightest looking road can sometimes lead you astray, and most of the worth following are far from straight. Even at the journey's end, it is easy to look back upon all the winding turns, hills and dips, and see an inevitable line form the start point to the present. We become blind to all of the junctions, forks and opportunities to leave the road altogether. Thus we remove ourselves from the blame of becoming lost because we set out with good intentions. On Caliban, we had a saying about good intentions. You cannot steer the arrow once it leaves the bow.
Julius Caesarion served as first captain of the Emperor's Children during the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy. A formidable and respected warrior during the Great Crusade, Caesarion would show great fondness for poetry, music, and the disciplines of the arts. Accompanying his Primarch, Fulgrim, during their cleansing of Laren, Julius would battle the Leia species within their capital city as they protected their accursed shrine of Slaanesh. Upon entering the temple, Caesarion would be enraptured and enthralled by the waves of lurid and degenerate sights, sounds, and stimuli. Now enticed with the lure of chaos, Caesarion, upon returning to the Emperor's Children fleet, would attempt to recreate his observances of the temple. Aiding in his legion's corruption to the pleasures of the senses, Chief Apothecary Fabius Bile would conduct surgeries on the Astartes using methods gleaned from the Laren species. Caesarion would undergo such surgeries, allowing the corruption of his mind to spread to his body. Prior to the betrayal of Istvan Free, Primarch Fulgrim would confront his most beloved brother, Ferrus Manus of the Iron Hands Legion, with the poisoned chalice of treachery. Accompanying the Phoenician alongside the Phoenix Guard, Caesarion would command his men to slay the Iron Hands Morlocks and grievously wound their first captain, Gabriel Santor. Escaping to the Istvan system with their backstabbing complete, Caesarion alongside his legion would further devolve into madness within the La Fenice auditorium of the vessel, Pride of the Emperor. With the corrupted performance created by the composer, Bekwa Kinska, the debauchery of the performance would resemble the experiences first seen within the Temple of the Lair. With mutations and possessions running rampant within the auditorium, Caesarion would be drawn to the musical abominations and slowly transform into one of the first accursed noise marines. Leading his newly forged Cacophony during the Istvan V Dropside Massacre, Julius would, despite his command, busy himself not with leading his men, but defiling the corpses of the fallen loyalists. Adorning his armor with scraps of their flesh and armor, Caesarion would be stopped with the confrontation of his nemesis, Gabriel Santor. Fully corrupted by chaos, Santor would look in horror at the creature that Julius had become. With a feral scream, Caesarion would charge at Santor. The two would duel in a ferocious battle, with the result causing both combatants to be agonizingly wounded. Yet for Julius, he would delight in such pain, with him thanking Santor for such exquisite agony. As both first captains succumbed to their wounds, Caesarion would nonetheless be chosen by his patron god, Slaanesh, to rise once more. Ascending to transform into a demon prince of She Who Firsts, Caesarion would be reborn during 812.M41 on the hive world of Shardanus. During the purge of the contiguous subsector, Caesarion would face the Iron Hands once more on the planet of Shardanus. Clan Rolkin's Lord Commander, Arvin Ralph,
would lead his librarians to face the Demon Prince in their attempt to prevent the planet from becoming a demon world. Successful in their toil, the Iron Hands would defeat Caesseron and banish his soul back to the roiling tides of the warp. His mortal form destroyed until his accursed being shall once again taint the mortal realm. Kaidomor Foryx served as a warsmith to the Iron Warriors during the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy. Born on Holy Terra, Foryx would wage war for many years before his legion would be reunited with his Primarch. Assuming Perturabo's homeworld as his spiritual home, Foryx would be one of only a few Terran Astartes to remain within the Legion. Serving with distinction during the Sactrada Deeps campaign, despite his misgivings to his Primarch's conduct of war. Ascending to the rank of First Captain of the 1st Grand Battalion, Foryx would prove himself as one of the greatest advisors to his Primarch, Perturabo. A member of the inner circle of the 4th Legion, the Trident, Foryx would battle during the Dropside Massacre of Istvan V and be responsible for commanding the assault of the Imperial Fist Retribution Fleet during the Battle of Phal. The Trident's members would be known as Triarchs, with Foryx serving as one of 3 personal advisors to Perturabo. Foryx would clash with his 2 contemporaries as both Triarchs Karkor and Golg would feud with Foryx, and regularly attempt to undermine him and sabotage his favour with Perturabo. Reticent and guilty for his participation in the Legion's continually worsening betrayals and atrocities, Foryx would nonetheless serve the orders of his Primarch. Perturabo would mirror Foryx's demeanour with time, feeling great anxiety and stress with his continual slaughter. During the destruction of the Olympian city of Lokos, Foryx would witness his Primarch, racked with guilt by the side of his sister Caliphone, murdered by Perturabo's own hand. Foryx would still accompany Perturabo during many of his journeys to worlds such as Idris, Sarum, and Ulanor. In recognition of his continued service to the Legion, Foryx would be given command of the assault of Uranus and Jupiter during the Solar War. Later joining the traitorous siege of Terra, Foryx would be dismayed with the newly promoted Triarch Kroger's assignment to capture the Lion's Gate spaceport. Tasked with infiltrating the spaceport and capturing the bridges linking the Lion's Gate to the spaceport, Foryx and his men would be trapped behind enemy lines. For weeks they would struggle to survive, with Kroger offering no support to aid Foryx's forces. Yet Foryx would survive. His entire battalion of 1,000 men strong would not be so fortunate. The death of his second-in-command, Garl, would deeply wound Foryx, only to be compounded with the knowledge that Perturabo had sacrificed Foryx's men to allow the Gloriana flagship, Iron Blood, to dock at the spaceport. Acknowledging that his Primarch bore no respect, love, or loyalty for his Gene-sons, Foryx would become embittered to the cause of the traitors and the scheming of the ruinous powers, stating that he would continue to fight not for his Primarch, but out of a sense of being unwilling to be defeated. Foryx would join the Iron Warriors in their abandonment of the siege, due to Horus's command to replace the Iron Warriors' deployment with the Death Guard Legion. Despairing that the Iron Warriors would be forever damned, Foryx would survive the Horus Heresy as a bitter reminder of Perturabo's malevolent leadership. Jaded and apathetic, Foryx would survive into the 41st millennium, serving as a captain under Barban Falk, the self-styled Warsmith. Despite his vast experience and skills as a leader, Foryx's life would end at the hands of a Warhound Titan during the Second Battle of Hydra Caudatus. His astringent legacy of complicity and bloodshed finally ending the Breaker. Kinjar served as first captain of the White Scars during the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy. A warrior of repute before his ascension as an Astartes, Kinjar would fight alongside his Primarch Jagatai during his conquest of Jagoris. A master of hunting in his youth, Kinjar would be favoured by his Primarch due to his exceptional skill in battle, prior to and after the formation of the Ordu of Jagatai. Master of the elite First Company, the Keshig, Kinjar would counsel his Genefather and even challenge his commands and decisions as one of his most loyal and trusted sons. A true force of nature, his speed in battle would remain even when garbed in his bulky Terminator armor plating. Gifted with a keen intelligence and an understanding of the flow of battle, Kinjar's twin power sword Dao, the Tails of the Dragon, would rend the enemies of the Scars without relent, encouraging his men to follow in his example of not only battle prowess, but also challenging of his Primarch's actions. Kinjar would train his elite forces to always rely on their instincts and code of honor. After 4 years of leading his forces in battle against the traitors of the Horus Heresy, Kinjar would face the Emperor's Children Lord Commander, Eidolon, at the Callium Gate. Mortally wounded by the Soul Severed, Kinjar would be rescued from the killing blow by his brother-in-arms, Revuel Arvida of the Thousand Suns. Aboard the Lance of Heaven, Kinjar would drift into the endless sleep in the presence of his stalwart friend, safe in the knowledge that his sacrifice would allow his legion to survive another day. Gunnar Gunhild served as first captain of the Space Wolves during the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy. As Wolf Lord of the First Great Company, Gunnar would be a respected warrior within the rout, despite his continually confrontational relationship with his Primarch, Leman Russ. Fighting with distinction during the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy, Lord Gunn would wage war in the name of Fenris during the burning of Prospero and the subsequent battle of the Alaxis Nebula. At his Primarch's side, Gunhild would fight with his battle-worn brothers until Russ would become demoralized during the skirmish with the Alpha Legion and retreat from the fray. Leading the Space Wolves in his stead, Gunnar would begin to lose faith in his Genefather's resolve. Yet with the intervention of Bjorn the One-Handed, Russ would return to the battle and lead his men to face the 20th Legion. Reinvigorated, the rout would fight for survival against the Hydra. To this end, Gunnar Gunhild would sacrifice his life, men and fleet vessel, Ragnarok, to destroy the Alpha Legion's most devastating warship, Delta. His death enabling his legion to escape the battle and survive to fight another day.
We began in ignorance, fighting a war that we did not understand against weapons we never dreamt existed. We were unready, we were vulnerable, we were weak. But in those first moments our enemies gave us strength. The strength to live, to rise from the bloody fields, to march on, but not to fall. All this is ours now, and was not before.
There are many Astartes amongst the Loyalist legions who fight and die in the name of the Emperor. Great martyrs are born in moments of sacrifice, their legendary defiance against chaos and the fell Xenos of the galaxy, a cornerstone of the Imperium's might. Though there is only one Astartes chapter that honors the finest blade of their battle brothers as Emperor's Champion. And that title originates from a singular warrior of Rogel Dawn's 7th Legion, first captain of the Imperial Fists, Sigismund. A Terran-born Astartes, Sigismund rose through the ranks of the Imperial Fists due to his relentless lethality and prowess in combat. It is often argued which hero of the Imperium's illustrious history is the greatest amongst their peers, but none of these arguments bear merit without the inclusion of Sigismund. Undefeated in combat, Sigismund gained a reputation during the Great Crusade amongst all Astartes legions as a noble yet ferocious warrior. Fighting alongside his Primarch, Sigismund, though brash and headstrong, would serve as Rogel Dawn's greatest warrior, seen less as an Astartes and more as a symbol of the Praetorian of Terror's invincible will. Sanguinius, Primarch of the Blood Angels, would even remark about Sigismund, saying that he was less the champion of Dawn and more fittingly the champion of death itself. During the Great Crusade, the Imperial Fists and World Eaters would wage war together on numerous occasions. As the foremost champions of their legions, Sigismund and Khan, equerry to the Primarch Angron, would become close comrades. Referring to one another as Oath Brothers, Sigismund would gain a reputation in the World Eater fighting pits on their flagship Conqueror, earning the moniker of Black Knight. Sigismund's time spent with the World Eaters would lead to him adopting the 12th Legion's custom of chaining their weapons to one arm, leading to the Black Templar practice known as devotional chains. During the beginning of the Horus Heresy, Sigismund would be one of the first Loyalist Astartes to confront Captain Nathaniel Garrow of the Death Guard Legion on board the battle-scarred ship known as the Eisenstein. Upon Garrow relaying the warning of Horus's betrayal to Rogel Dawn, the Vigilant would isolate himself from his legion. Once Dawn had decided on a plan of action, he would command Sigismund to evaluate the credibility of Horus's betrayal. During his moments of inner turmoil, Sigismund would speak with Euphrates Keeler, the former Imagist serving alongside the Lunar Wolves Legion of Astartes, and first living saint of the Imperium. She would warn Sigismund that soon the traitor legions would invade Holy Terror, and that he would be forced to choose where he would stand in the coming battle. Showing him a vision of the possible future, Keeler would reveal the death of the Imperium itself, his corpse another unremembered son added to the pile. The other choice resulting in his death, but with the elucidation of his virtue, the survival of the Imperium, and his duty to his Primarch fulfilled. Sigismund would request Dawn to allow him to remain at his side, which his Primarch allowed, but with uncertainty as to his finest warrior's reasoning. In Sigismund's place, Captain Yonad would serve his Primarch, though Rogel Dawn trusted Sigismund's plea without reservation or objection. The Imperial Fists would be recalled to Holy Terror with the news of the coming betrayal and be tasked with fortifying the throne world. Masters of fortification and siegecraft, the Emperor's Praetorians would prepare for the coming onslaught. However, Dawn would send forth 30,000 Astartes of his legion to combat the forces of Chaos stationed in the Istvan system. With over 500 ships, they would be dubbed the Retribution Fleet. Whilst overseeing the fortification constructions on Terra, word would reach Rogel Dawn of the massacre of Istvan V, the death of Iron Hand Primarch Ferrus Manus and the destruction of his legion, the betrayal of the Night Lords, Iron Warriors, Alpha Legion and Wordbearers, and the near annihilation of the Loyalist Raven Guard and Salamander Legions, the Primarchs of both legions missing in action. And with all this, his Retribution Fleet had not returned. Enraged, Dawn would command Sigismund to purge the Sol system of any betrayers to the throne, given whatever means Sigismund saw fit to achieve his Primarch's goals. Before his dispatch, Sigismund would reveal the vision he had seen to his Primarch, and the reasoning for his request to stay at his side. Dawn would rebuke his Gene Son, reminding him that Astartes nor Primarch chose their duty to the Emperor. Their fate was not to choose, only to serve. With his Primarch's trust squandered, and ashamed at his deception, Sigismund offered his Primarch his blade, the Black Sword, requesting he end his life rather than live in shame. Dawn would refuse to kill his loyal son, but would no longer allow him to sow doubt or fear or superstition within his legion's ranks. Those would be Sigismund's burden alone. Dawn would disown his son, but Sigismund, ever the dutiful captain, would resolve not to stew in his pity nor abandon the cause he had been shown by Euphrates Keeler. He would be there to protect his Gene Father. He vowed to himself that he would not fail. Horus Lupercal's invasion of Terra would birth legends and heroes aplenty, and during the Siege of Terra, Rogel Dawn would bestow Sigismund the title of Emperor's Champion. Serving as the Almighty's personal champion, though humbled, Sigismund's armor would be painted in the white and black of the champion's colors. He felt disturbed that his heraldry of the Imperial Fists would be replaced, but was set at ease by the 7th Legion High Chaplain, stating that the Reclusiasm served in the Emperor's name, and Sigismund was kindred in this honor. Sigismund would scour the battlefield, challenging the champions of Chaos to single combat and slaughtering anything that stood in his path. The Imperial Fists would remain stationed on Terra for the remainder of the siege, with their Primarch Rogel Dawn, Primarch Sanguinius, and the Emperor, beloved by all, assaulting the flagship of Horus Lupercal, the Vengeful Spirit. With the traitor legions repelled from Terra, Primarch Rabute Guilliman would create a tome, the Codex Astartes, to regulate the legions to prevent any further betrayals by limiting their amassed strength. Sigismund would be chosen to lead the Imperial Fist's second founding chapter, the Black Templars, as its first High Marshal. The Black Templars would embrace the chapter markers of the black and white panoply of war, first donned by Sigismund during the Siege of Terra. Their High Marshal resolving that a gesture of supreme faith in the Emperor was required for his Imperium to survive. Restless and with Ironforge's zealous rage, the Black Templars would initiate the longest unbroken crusade in humanity's history. For 10,000 years the Templars would lay waste to the enemies of the Imperium, and every subsequent High Marshal that followed in Sigismund's place would swear an oath for this Holy Crusade's renewal and continuation. Sigismund's last battle would be pitted against the inheritor of the arch-traitor's heretical ideals, Abaddon the Despoiler. During 781 of the 31st millennium, Abaddon would be discovered leading a host of traitor and demon forces, enacting the first in a number of his accursed Black Crusades. Warmaster Abaddon had schemed within the Eye of Terror for centuries, building his newly assembled Black Legion of traitor Astartes. The Black Templars would stand against the traitor forces, Sigismund at their lead. With over 1,000 years of service to his Imperium, though blunted by age, was nonetheless still deadly enough to instill fear in all enemies of his Imperium. Sigismund's quest to find Abaddon complete, he would inform the Despoiler that during his onslaught at the Siege of Terra, when the flames of heresy still burned upon its scarred visage, lesser men had impeded his path, their lives forfeit in preventing his blade from cutting down Horus's most favored son. The two ancient warriors would fight, the ebony black sword and the talon of Horus clashing until Sigismund plunged his sword through the Warmaster's chest. Despite such a crippling blow, Abaddon would disembowel Sigismund with his talon, another legendary foe's blood lavering the claw's vicious blades.
Sigismund,
Abaddon said, through lips darkened by his own lifeblood.
this claw has killed 2 Primarchs. It wounded the Emperor unto death. I would have spared it the taste of your life as well, if only you could see what I have seen.
As I stared through Abaddon's eyes, I confess I expected the triteness of some night oath or a final murmur in the Emperor's name. Instead, the ruined thing that had been first captain of the Imperial Fists and High Marshal of the Black Templars spoke through a mouthful of blood, committing the last of his life to biting off each word, ensuring he spoke each one in shivering, sanguine clarity.
You will die as your weakling father died, soulless, honorless, weeping, ashamed.
Sigismund's last word was also his last breath. It sighed out of his mouth, taking his soul with it. This is a gang tradition from our homeworld. The hand of traitors and fools were tattooed red by their families to show them as death-marked, a sign that no gang or family would tolerate grave failure, but that the condemned still had labor to perform before they were allowed to die.
So which are you, traitor or fool?
Both. There are many battle cries, rallying calls, and spiteful remarks uttered by the enemies of his Imperium. Spoutings of madmen, contemptuous warlords and renegades of the Emperor's light. Though there is one mantra repeated by heretics and pawns of chaos, which shall live in infamy forevermore in the annals of human history. Attributed to an Astartes of immense martial prowess from a damned legion of criminals and murderers. Death to the false Emperor, the cursed utterance of Jago Sevatarian, first captain of the 8th Legion of Adeptus Astartes, the Night Lords. Jago Sevatarian was born on the homeworld of Primarch Conrad Kurz, Nostromo. Living within Nostromo Quintus on the city's edge, as a child, Jago harbored psychic powers. With the ascension of the planet's Night Haunter, the Night Lord's Legion would recruit Sevatarian into the 8th Legion. Rising quickly within the Legion's ranks, Jago would become a swift and deadly warrior. Elevated to the first captain of the Legion and officer of the inner circle of the Legion's captains, the Chiroptera, Sevatarian, also known as Sevatar, would be regarded throughout the legions of the Adeptus Astartes as one of its single most deadly combatants. Wielding the chain glaive, Knight's Whisper, Sevatar would be regarded alike in martial prowess to Seneschal Corswain of the Dark Angels and First Captains Abaddon of the Lunar Wolves, Ralderon of the Blood Angels, and Sigismund of the Imperial Fists. Suppressing his psychic powers, his secret would not remain concealed from his Primarch. Kurz would not reveal Jago's secret to his Legion, possibly due to Sevatarian's calming influence over him, which proved invaluable during his moments of heated exchange with his brother Primarchs, including Kurz's clash with the Primarch of the Raven Guard, Corvus Corax, during the Carinae Retribution. The relationship between Sevatarian and his Genefather would be laced with tensions regarding their innate psychic abilities, for his Primarch had seen a vision of the death of Jago, though would not divulge the details of his demise. Siding with his Primarch as his closest counsel, Jago would endorse the destruction of their homeworld of Nostromo. For the 8th Legion had left for the Great Crusade, and on their return found their homeworld to be overrun with crime and corruptions once more that had once been quelled by the Night Haunter. Despite the protestations of other legionaries within the Night Lords, such as Lord Commander Sheng, the Night Lord's fleet would bombard Nostromo, fracturing the Legion and causing mutinies across multiple ships of the 8th Legion's fleet. Mutinies which Jago and his elite Terminator First Company, the Atramentar, would brutally and mercilessly exterminate. The treachery of the Night Lords would continue with their involvement in the Horus Heresy. Their alliances with the traitorous Iron Warriors, Word Bearers, and Alpha Legion beginning with their deployment during the Istvan V Dropside Massacre. Amongst other notable legionaries such as Argol Tal of the Gal Vorbak, Jago would be present during the speech orated by Primarch of the Word Bearers, Lorgar Aurelian. Such was the prowess of the Urizen's words, Sevatar would utter his infamous remark, "Death to the false Emperor," setting in motion the war cry that would resound for millennia amongst the cursed voices of untold millions of heretics throughout the stars. Prior to the Night Lord's intervention at the Battle of Istvan, Sevatar would treat his now allied cousin Astartes with respect. Yet as the battles waged on the surface of Istvan V, the Night Lords would observe the corruption of the Gal Vorbak and Argol Tal first-hand. Recoiling at the demon host transformations, Sevatar would become openly hostile to his new allies, viewing them rightly as abominations to life itself, and giving credence to his renegade legion's aversion and transformative degenerations of the ruinous powers. With the Night Lord's slaughter of the loyalist legions of the Salamanders, Iron Hands and Raven Guard, they would seek a new foe to bring to heel. The proud and stern disciples of Primarch Lionel Johnson, the Dark Angels. Instigating the Framas Crusade, the Night Lords would crush several industrial forge worlds and ill-equipped human forces within the eastern fringes of space. With the arrival of the Dark Angels, many bloody engagements would be fought. Sevatar would injure the Dark Angels' chapter master, Alahos, during battle, mockingly promising to one day kill him and use his head as a trophy of war before they would both retreat the field. In light of the stalemate of battles, the Night Lords would offer a parley to the Primarch of the First Legion. The Lion and Night Haunter would travel with 2 bodyguards and meet on the surface of the planet Sagwalza. The Lion accompanied by Master Alahos and Paladin Corswain, whilst Kurz would bring Sevatar and his Huskarl, Sheng. The bodyguards would trade insults, Corswain insinuating that Sevatar's mother had laid with Nostraman pigs. Not rising to the bait, Sevatar and Corswain would converse on his newly painted Sinner's Red Gauntlets, the death mark Sevatar had been given since his involvement at the massacre of Istvan V. The parley would ultimately be broken as Konrad Curze would call into question the Lion's loyalty to the Imperium. Both Primarchs and their Astartes champions would battle. Sevatar would slay Alahos, yet his Dark Angel's battle brother, Corswain, would save the life of the Lion, impaling the Primarch of the Night Lords through the spine with his sword. Reinforcements of both legions would rush to their respective Primarch's aid, dragging both from the engagement, bloodied but alive. With time, Konrad Curze would heal from his injuries on Sagwalza, re-engaging the Dark Angel's forces across the remainder of the Framas Crusade. Ambushed at Sheol, the Night Lords would be undone by a final push from the First Legion. Organizing the Night Lord's flagship, Nightfall, to cover his legion's retreat, Sevatar would command the Nightfall to aid in his legion's evacuation. With his Primarch injured and in a dormant state, Sevatar would form a new Chiroptera Guard and divide the remnants of the Night Lord's Legion into 5 great companies, allowing the 8th Legion to organize and execute independent campaigns across the stars without the intervention of Legion Command or their Primarch's permission. Harnessing his own psychic powers, Sevatar would attempt to reawaken the Night Haunter. Entering Konrad Curze's mind, Sevatar would be violently expelled from his Genefather's psyche. Realizing upon his attempt to awaken his Primarch that his forces had been discovered by the Dark Angel's Legion, Sevatar would muster his remaining forces to combat the First Legion. During the slaughter, Curze would awaken and order Sevatar to accompany him with his new Atramentar to board the Dark Angel's flagship, the Invincible Reason, and face Primarch Lionel Johnson directly. Yet Sevatar's now unlocked psychic abilities would adversely affect the captain of the First Company. Losing consciousness during this skirmish with the Dark Angels, the Atramentar and their Primarch would be captured. Imprisoned and suffering from his psychic whiplash, Sevatar would languish within the bowels of the Invincible Reason. Believing himself to be dying, Sevatar would be aided by the compassionate astropath aboard the Dark Angel's flagship, Altani. Easing his burden, the astropath would prevent his psychic powers from killing him, an act of kindness that would lead to her spine being broken by the Dark Angel's master of the choir, an act which would enrage the caged Sevatar. Escaping during the prisoner transfer to the transport ship, the Remnant of Brotherhood, Sevatar would escape and murder the master of the choir. Reveling in a mad tirade, "I am justice, I am judgment, I am punishment." His fate thereafter has been lost to history. His stature as first captain of the Night Lords succeeded by Sao Sahal, a Terran-born Astartes of the 8th Legion. The Atramentar would dissolve with his absence, with no Astartes of the Legion able to live up to his reputation or skill in battle. The Night Lords would acknowledge his death, despite no record of his ultimate fate. Like many aspects of the Prince of Crow's life, even his end would be shrouded in mystery. Yet in hushed murmurs across the bleakest corners of the Imperium, some madmen and heretics believe the man known as Sevatar to still live, though such a prospect is unlikely, much to the relief of the Imperium. The wolves kill cleanly, and we do not. They also kill quickly, and we have neither done that either. They fight, they win, and they stalk back to their ships with their tails held high. If they were ever ordered to destroy another legion, they would do it by hurling warrior against warrior, seeking to grind their enemies down with the admirable delusions of the noble savage. If we were ever ordered to assault another legion, we would virus bomb their recruitment worlds, slaughter their serfs and slaves, poison their gene seed repositories, and spend the next dozen decades watching them die slow, humiliating deaths. Night after night, raid after raid, we'd overwhelm stragglers from their fleets and bleach their skulls to hang from our armor, until none remained. But that isn't the quick execution the Emperor needs, is it? The wolves go for the throat. We go for the eyes, then the tongue, then the hands, then the feet. Then we skin the crippled remains and offer it as an example to any still bearing witness. The wolves were warriors before they became soldiers. We were murderers first, last, and always. Raldoron served as the first captain of the Blood Angels during the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy. A dour presence, bereft of conviviality, the first captain of the Blood Angels would excel at reading the emotional and cognitive intent of his battle brothers. Commanding with a fluid and robust command style, Raldoron would also earn a reputation as one of the greatest warriors the Imperium had ever seen. Compared in martial prowess to Astartes such as Abaddon of the Lunar Wolves, Sigismund of the Imperial Fists, and Jago Sevatarian of the Night Lords. Raldoron would wage war over many joint campaigns, including the war against the Nephilim on Melchior alongside the Lunar Wolves. Accompanying his gene father Sanguinius to the Edict of Nicaea, Raldoron would be further honoured with the title of Equerry to his Primarch, an honour that would be tested during the dark days of the Horus Heresy. Aiding in the defense of the Siege of Terra, Raldoron would be stationed at the Helios Gate of the Imperial Palace. Fighting alongside Maximus Fane of the Imperial Fists, he would duel Gendor Skyvok of the Night Lords, injuring the Night Lord seemingly unto death and defending the honour of his legion, and further cementing his view of the Night Lords being a legion comprised entirely of evil souls. As the Siege of Terra waged and waned, Raldoron would be redeployed to aid Jagatai Khan, Custodi Constantin Valdor, and Marshal Aldana Agathe to face the traitor Death Guard Legion and their demon hordes. Surviving the engagement, Raldoron would inherit the tragic task of leading the Blood Angels Legion after the death of his father, Sanguinius, at the hands of Horus Lupercal. Raldoron would carry his father's remains to their sacred homeworld of Baal, interring the great angel into his final resting place. With the beginning of the scouring of traitors across the galaxy, Raldoron would serve the now Codex-compliant chapter as its first chapter master. His blade sundering the enemies of his Imperium, his legend would live on, despite his fate being lost to history.
Gabriel Santor served as the first captain of the Iron Hands during the Horus Heresy. Born on Medusa, Santor became captain of the Averni clan and commanded the elite honor guard of the Iron Hands known as the Morlocks. As the equerry to his Primarch, Santor would act as counsel to the Gorgon and cool Ferrus Manus' legendary temper, ensuring cohesion within the Legion. During the fall of the Lords of Gardenal, Gabriel would be severely wounded, leading to him undergoing several bionic replacements to the left side of his body. Unlike many of his brother Astartes, Santor did not hold to the belief of the Creed of Iron, believing that although the flesh of man was weak, it was a burden to shoulder, allowing the solidarity and promotion of strength to lesser men of the Imperium armed forces, such as the Imperial Army, whom would serve with the Iron Hands on numerous occasions. Santor also believed, alike to his cousins of the Ultramarines, that when the Crusades would be won, the Astartes would need to lay down their arms and pursue lives of duty and statesmanship, even if only as honor guards or statues within the Imperial Palace, relics of an age of war giving way to an age of prosperity and peace. Santor would also be the sole survivor of Fulgrim's betrayal aboard the Iron Hands flagship, the Fist of Iron, and meet his end at the hands of Emperor's Children First Captain Julius Caesaron during the Istvan V Dropsite Massacre.
Marius Gage served as the first chapter master of the Ultramarines Legion during the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy. Born on Holy Terra, Gage would serve as Lord Commander of the 13th Legion prior to the discovery of their Primarch. With the reunion between Rebuti Guilliman and his Legion, Marius would be assigned as Chapter Master Primus and become the second in command to his Primarch. Serving his Legion with honour and distinction, Gage would be tested like never before during the betrayal of the Word-Bearers at the Ultramar planet of Calth. Wrong-footed by the actions of the 17th Legion, Gage would helm the Ultramarines' flagship, the Macragge's Honour, during the assault of the traitors. With Primarch Lorgar Aurelian's refusal to negotiate peace, Gage would be given reluctant permission by his Primarch to engage the traitors. With the invasion of demons at the behest of Lorgar, Marius would be injured and lose his hand in the ensuing skirmish. Saved by Ultramarine Sergeant Aenid Fiel, Gage would order kill teams to deploy and counter the word-bearer boarding actions on the flagship. Rendezvousing with Roboute Guilliman and Remus Ventanus, the Ultramarines would plan their counterattack, with Gage recommending teleporting a kill team to destroy the enemy orbital defenses. Ordered by Primarch Guilliman to pursue the word-bearer's flagship, Infidus Imperator, under the command of the Dark Cardinal, Kor Phaeron, Gage would pursue the word-bearers into the warp. After a tumultuous voyage and deadly engagement, the Macragge's honor would succeed in destroying the Infidus Imperator, yet be unable to slay the retreating Kor Phaeron. Addressing his men, Gage would oversee the repairs to the Macragge's honor and promise his crew that no matter how long it would take, they would brave the warp and return to Ultramar. Surviving the Horus Heresy, Gage and his crew would manage to make safe harbor, and with the introduction of the Codex Astartes, the Ultramarines would be broken down into smaller, compliant chapters. Gage inheriting the rank of Chapter Master of the Ultramarines' first founding chapter, his deeds thereafter would be lost to history. Though it is doubtless that Gage led his chapter with honor, dignity, and unyielding duty.
The flies feasted on them, eating in through the soft tissues of their bodies and the jelly of their eyes. Even those sealed tight inside their breastplate could not escape, as the warp-tainted insects seemed to be able to pass through the tiniest of apertures in search of meat to chew upon. Then, like the outrush of a retreating tide, the screaming swarm left the desiccated bodies of the fallen behind and imploded back towards the center of the chamber. At the eye of this pestilent storm stood Mortarion and his former brother in battle. Whatever animating essence had been Ignatius Grulgor boiled out of the demon flesh as it died, the flies ignoring the dissolving, putrid mass that had been the eater of lives, content to let the demon discorporate and crumble. Instead, they whirled around Typhon in a stream of dark blurs before suddenly diving into him. The swarm bored up through the great wound Mortarion Scythe had left in the first captain, and they plunged down his open mouth. He welcomed them, taking everything they gave. Aghast, Mortarion could do nothing as Typhon's body twitched, writhed and distended to accommodate the transformation eating him from the inside out. His back swelled amid the crackle of fracturing bone and ceramite, and dense flutes of fissured horn burst out, each one spitting clouds of flies as smoke would belch from a chimney. He shuddered, sloughing off lumps of dead, grey flesh to reveal the new bloom of rotting muscle beneath. Where his battle armor ended and the putrid meat of him began was impossible to see. Finally, with a repellent crunch of breaking cartilage, the nub of a twisted horn grew from the first captain's swollen face. He glanced up, wheezing and shuddering, and with each indrawn breath and exhalation, Mortarion could hear the droning of the flies inside him. He had become a hive for the things, a living nest for the destroyer plague. "Callus," Mortarion whispered in the deathly silence that followed. "What have you done?"
"Know my name,"
came the seething reply.
"I am the herald of what we shall be, Mortarion."
He drew himself up, flexing his arms and testing the play in his mutated, new form.
I am Typhus.
The pawns of chaos are often the victims of scheming gods, unaware of the true intent of their benefactors and the resultant paths they will tread. Champions, lords and demon princes all dance to the tune of corruption, decadence, and depravity, yet only the most malevolent schemers chose to pledge their service to the primordial annihilator willingly. For today, we shall elucidate the chosen herald of the plague god and architect of the downfall of his kinsman and even Genesire. the first captain of the Death Guard Legion, Typhus the Traveler. Among the planets which would harbor the sons of the Emperor, many Death Worlds forged Primarchs and Legions, molded through strife and ruin. The Noble First revered the feral wilds of Caliban and incorporated knightly virtues into their orders, whilst the Forge Masters of the 18th looked to their volcanic landscapes of Nocturne as inspiration for their Promethean cult. Yet among such desolate bodies of suffering and toil, one planet would be marked as little more than a playground for degenerate tyrants, Barbarus. Ruled by malevolent psykers, utilizing their warp-spawned powers to reanimate the dead of countless battles fought for land and influence, the human denizens of this accursed world eked out a harsh existence as farmers within the new settlements of untainted soil. So terrible were the actions of these necromancer overlords that many who lived upon Barbarus exterminated all vestiges of psychic potential from their kin, for to allow such mutants to live would surely usher future torment if left unchecked. A child of Barbarus wandered the farmlands of his home, every plant in his presence shriveling and object stirring with each moment of emotional stress endured. A boy named Callus Typhon. A hybrid born, sharing blood with an overlord of Barbarus, the villagers of Callus's tribe drowned his mother following his birth, yet could not bring themselves to murdering an innocent. With time, the boy learned to master his psychic potential. The elders of his village, impressed by his innate talent to harness such powers to benefit his people. Training to one day become capable of defending his tribe from the oppression of the necromancer overlords, a chance to emancipate his people presented itself with the defection of a fostered son of High Overlord Nakar, Mortarion. Ignorant of the Primarch's true genetic legacy, Callas by a quirk of fate encountered Mortarion during his escape from his jailer's keep and led the towering figure to the sanctuary of his village. Inviting persecution from Nakar, Mortarion took up the harvesting scythe of the people of the village and slew the pawns of his armies, his blade carving through swathes of their men before hunting down the leader of the ragtag band of undead thralls. Impressed with the giant warrior's martial skill and resolved to liberate Barbarus's populace from oppression, Typhon pledged to fight at the side of the Reaper of Souls as the first of his rebel militia, the Death Guard. Assuming the mantle of Mortarion's lieutenant and most trusted advisor, Callus Typhon fought by the side of Mortarion as their war against the overlords began to tip the scales of power. Present during the Emperor's reunion with his gene son, the half-breed of Barbarus required new purpose following the death of High Overlord Nakar, and after being screened by the apothecaries of the Dusk Raiders of Terra, proved to be a perfect candidate to join their ranks. Drawing recruits from Typhon's clan of origin, the Death Guard's character changed irrevocably. The stoic Terran warriors of old supplanted with this hardy breed of dour Barbarans. Though Callus was trusted above all of his genesire's progeny, such favor could never protect him from the Legion's disdain for the use of psychic powers. Concealing his talents from his kinsmen, Typhon mastered the 14th Legion's tactics and training suited to tests of stamina, constitution, and endurance. Already proven in the eyes of his liege due to his stalwart service during the war against the overlords of Barbarus, it came as surprise to no one that Callus was destined to lead the 14th Legion as their first captain. His immense strength and durability, unaided by his use of psychic powers, none could know the full extent of his martial and strategic prowess should he one day let loose his full psychic potential. Leading his men throughout the Great Crusade as a noteworthy, if not unsubtle, warrior king, the 14 steeds, made in Typhon's name, resounded throughout the Imperium. Wading through the deadliest of war zones with ease, no matter the toxic hazards nor firepower pitted against his men, the Man-Reaper of the first captain claimed untold thousands of lives in service to the Emperor's vision for a united galaxy. Each first captain of the Legions was a legend in their own right during this era of prosperity, and even among such heroic figures, Calas Typhon stood tall. Respected greatly by the foster father of the lion, Sar Luthor, these knightly cousins born of distant death worlds bore a shared admiration for their deeds made as warriors, forged from hostile origins. Surviving wounds which would slay a typical Astartes, Typhon's head injury sustained from the tribe wars of Rothric IX, rather than disorientating him, spurred him on to greater heights of slaughter. Saving a squadron of the Silent Sisterhood during the campaign of Madrigal, Typhon's act of cushioning the force of an exploding crack grenade with his body took only a mere week to recover from within his legion's apothecarion. The champion of a legion characterized by stubborn defiance in the face of horrendous odds, even the 49 Death Shroud elite, handpicked by the Lord of Death, paled in comparison to their captain. For even among a force such as the Angels of Death, reputed to be incapable of fear, those who followed Calas Typhon could not honestly proclaim a lack of terror at the sight of this harbinger of destruction. Typhon's star had been in ascendance for many years, with the closing of the Great Crusade on the horizon. Yet for all his efforts made in the name of his legion, he still could not reveal his nature. The taboo of warp powers still ingrained within his kinsmen. Should they learn of his powers, it was likely that they would cut him down alike to just another foe they had already slain in the margins of millions throughout their campaigns waged in the name of the Imperium. The Master of Mankind had decreed the Edict of Nicaea, a stricture on all use of psychers within the Legiones Astartes, and his own Gene-Sire had personally declared that use of any manipulations of the Immaterium were an affront to nature. Typhon was alike to a caged bird, his wings never able to unfurl and take flight, whilst under the watchful eyes of his hypocritical emancipator. Yet little did Calas know that another's gaze had been watching him with interest for decades. Those of the first chaplain of the Wordbearer's Legion, Erebus. Promising Typhus freedom from the regime that entrapped him, Erebus inducted Calas into the fraternal seven-pillared warrior lodge and revealed fell secrets drawn from the primordial pantheon. Glimpsing portents of the grandeur awaiting himself and his kin should they cast off the shackles of the imperial truth, a revelation shook Typhon to his core and set the first captain down the path of damnation. In the stead of the Emperor, the Primarch of the 16th Legion, Horus Lupercal, would reign as the master of mankind, and all those who bore the gift of psychic mutation would be unfettered. Standing at the side of his Primarch, Mortarion, Typhus conspired with his Gene-Sire to cleanse their legion of those loyal to the Emperor, and chose to revolt against his will. The overwhelming Barbaran stock of the 14th Legion stood in lockstep with their Primarch, concealing their intention to quell their Terran forebears and any of their own bloodlines who defied the ascendance of the War Master of Chaos. Ordering his subordinate, Commander Ignatius Grulgor of the Second Great Company, to keep a close eye on the Terran-born battle captain, Nathaniel Garrow, during their coup, Typhon knew in his heart that such a staunch scion of the Imperium could never be swayed to their cause. Upon Istvan Free, the traitor contingents of the Death Guard set their plot into motion, deploying their loyalist brethren onto the surface of the planet before smothering their number with barrages of virus bombs and cleansing flame. Not even the Sons of Mortarion could endure the fell payloads of such Exterminatus-class weapons, and as Typhus watched the death of this far-flung world from orbit, he felt a strange feeling of unease as their meticulous scheme unfolded. Aboard the Voidcraft, the Eisenstein, Nathaniel Garrow and those loyal to the Emperor had slain Grulgor and begun maneuvers to escape the Istvan system. Attempting to intercept the escaping frigate aboard his flagship, the Terminus Est, though Typhon managed to heavily damage the vessel, the Eisenstein escaped into the warp and would soon bring word of the clandestine betrayal to the attention of the Emperor. Thousands of Death Guard littered the soil of Istvan Free, yet small bands of warriors remained on its surface. For 3 months, Typhon alongside the traitor legions of the Emperor's children, World Eaters, and Sons of Horus purged the remnants of their valiant former kin. With word reaching the Imperium of the atrocity of Istvan III, a retribution fleet consisting of the Iron Hands, Salamanders and Raven Guard were dispatched. Rivers of blood soaked the soil of Istvan V as the wearied traitor legions held back the wrath of the Emperor, their patience rewarded with the defection of the Iron Warriors, Night Lords, Word Bearers and Alpha Legion in the ensuing second wave of battle. Horus's rebellion now held claim to 9 legions following the conclave of the Primarchs, for even Magnus the Red of Prospero had suffered at the hands of the loyal sons of the Imperium and pledged his service to their new benefactors. Once more reunited with the bearers of the Word, their influence guided Typhon to seek out the Plague Lord, Nurgle, within the dark corners of the Void as he embarked with a splinter fleet of the 14th. Typhon was much changed, for he no longer fought in the name of the Emperor, nor even his Primarch. Callas fought only for himself and the patron for whom he now pledged fealty. Mortarion's Death Guard remained ignorant of the true power of Chaos, for unlike the sons of the Phoenician who thirsted for stimuli, scions of the Red Angel who hungered for blood, and ravenous scholars of the Crimson King seeking knowledge, the 14th spurned the gifts they so richly deserved. Taking action into his own hands, Typhus attempted to acquire the mysterious Tucholcha engine in possession of the Dark Angel's Legion. Failing to wrestle control of the powerful artifact from the Lion of Caliban, Typhon retreated to the Zaramun system to seek sanctuary from an old ally. Meeting with Sarlufa, his old friend concealed the Death Guard fleet from the pursuing Retribution force under the command of the Dark Angel Seneschal, Corswain. Noticing changes within his form, the gifts of Nurgle had begun to bloom within Typhon, and Lufa knew in his heart that the being known as Callas would soon transform into something else entirely. A student of Chaos Grimoires, gifted by First Chaplain Erebus, Sarlufa knew not the full extent of the transformation which Typhon would endure, yet cared only for the safety of Caliban, and so resupplied Callas's fleet to embark upon the Void once more. Instructed by Erebus to meet with his Genesire to enact the meticulous ploy devised between them, Typhon returned to Mortarion's side upon the world of Enix. Dissatisfied with his Primarch's refusal to submit to the will of the Plague God, Callas slew the Death Guard's fleet navigators, framing them as conspirators with the Emperor's advisor, Malcador the Sigillite. Convincing Mortarion that his own psychic talents would suffice in allowing the fleet to navigate through the warp in order to meet with the traitors assembling at Ulanor, the fate of the Death Guard was forever sealed. Once within the Immaterium, Typhon delivered the fleet into the clutches of the Lord of Decay, his influence pouring through each Voidcraft until his gifts infected every living soul aboard. Nurgle's rot and the Destroyer Plague polluted the vessel as countless flies formed miasmas of sickness, disease and corruption throughout their confines. Each bite of skin formed pustules and gelatinous ooze, growths and colonies of insects birthing from the marrow, organs and vestiges of tissue not sloughing into rotting puddles. So trained were the Death Guard to endure disease was their blessing turned into a curse, their adaptations allowing them to endure horrendous mutations. Confronting Callas within the Terminus Est, Mortarion struck his first captain with the blade of his deadly war scythe, Silence, its edge biting deep into his body, ending his life. Callas Typhon was dead, yet Grandfather Nurgle would not allow his chosen herald to perish, and as such, allowed him to rise once more. Ordering the returned First Plague Marine and Demon Prince, Ignatius Grulgor, to kill Typhus, as Grulgor suffocated the life from the first captain with his hands wrapped around his throat, the deadly flies swarming the ship devoured his flesh. Yet this abominable swarm of the Destroyer Plague had found a new vessel to harbor their grotesque hives, the corpse of the half-breed of Barbarus. Pouring into the corpse of Typhon, the Destroyer Plague transformed his body into a parody of life, protrusions erupting from his spine, his flesh melting from his bones as his armor bloated and a single sharp horn sprouted from his skull. Typhon was no more, for today, the being known only as Typhus the Traveler had been born. Observing the plague god's influence invade the form of his Primarch, Typhus witnessed the Pale King submit his soul to serve the Grandfather in order to deliver his men from the unfathomable pain they had endured. Finally, the last demon prince of the Four had been claimed, and with the Pale King reborn in the image of the Lord of Decay, the Death Guard were truly ready to invade the Throne World. Typhus had near single-handedly changed the course of his legion's future, and through his actions proved to be worthy of the Plague God's favor. Capable of unleashing both the Destroyer Plague, Nurgle's Rot, and his array of psychic talents at will, Typhus was truly a vessel for the most devastating gifts of the Lord of Pestilence. His Cataphractite Terminator armor deformed to strange proportions, his Man-Reaper power scythe instilled terror into those that saw the bite of its edge. Present during the Siege of Terror, during 014.M31, Typhus fought alongside the Primarch of the Iron Warriors, Perturabo, first captain of the Sons of Horus, Ezekiel Abaddon, and the Dark Apostle of the Word-Bearers, Zardu Leak, in their efforts to breach the walls of the Imperial Palace. Summoning the Demon Prince of Nurgle, Korvax Utterblight, into the material realm, the rampage unleashed by the disgusting creature subverted the civilian populace's religious zeal and turned their faith into despair. As the siege protracted, Typhus faced the White Scars, Blood Angels, and Custodian Guard in battle as they fought tooth and nail to defend the Colossi Gate. Following the fall of the Colossi Gate, Corswain of the Dark Angels managed to retake and reactivate the Astronomicon within the Hollow Mountains, and in doing so had aided the traversal of the Dark Angels, Space Wolves, and Ultramarines legions to reinforce Terra. Dispatched by Mortarion to shut down the Astronomicon, Typhus's forces, though able to wound Corswain, proved unsuccessful in preventing the first living saint, Euphrates Keeler, from sustaining the light of the Astronomicon. Mortarion fell at the Battle of the Lionsgate Spaceport at the hands of the Warhawk, Jagatai Khan, and with the Pale King's banishment into the Warp, Typhus assumed total command of the Death Guard. Bereft of their Primarch, the 14th Legion could do little but erode away the defenses of the Loyalists. Yet with the Astronomicon active, it would not take long for the might of the Lion, Wolf King, and Lord of Ultramar to carry the day, and so it was that the War Master of Chaos, Horus Lupercal, sought to end the battle personally. Facing the Emperor in battle, the Lupercal fell, and all hope of the traitor's victory crumbled, their myriad forces retreating with all haste from their ill-fated siege. Typhus the Traveler endured, yet without the constraints of his Primarch, and given the authority to command the 14th Legion, Typhus rallied his men to retreat into the Eye of Terror. Mortarion with time returned and reigned over the demon world known simply as the Plague Planet, a hypocritical mockery of his homeworld of Barbarous, once more ruled by a malevolent tyrant. Disgusted by the mawkishness of his gene-sire, Typhus abandoned the Death Guard Legion and committed himself as a true disciple of the Plague God, rallying a plague fleet in his image to enact the will of their patron. For much of the Garden of Nurgle required tending, and if its boundaries were to grow, new seeds must be planted across the stars. For 10 millennia, the Traveler wandered the expanse of the void at the head of his plague fleet, the unmistakable image of the Terminus Est darkening the sky of each planet it loomed over. Across hundreds of worlds, the Destroyer Plague found new victims to feast upon and spread its malign influence. For wherever the Traveler treads, his virulent decay spreads unholy spores and hatchlings of the Grandfather. Fueled by a need to create the perfect plague in order to bring the galaxy to heel, Typhus has studied the flora, fauna, and creatures of the Garden of Nurgle and sought all means to hone his craft of decay and unclean renewal. Defending the Garden of Nurgle from invasion by the Blood Legions of Khorne, Typhus claimed the organs of his slain demon prince of the blood god at the Bubbling Gully and offered them to Nurgle's cauldron. Rewarded with the chance to dip his scythe into the brew of Nurgle's cauldron at the side of his throne, now even close proximity to its stench is enough to lay low a mortal man. Favoured far in excess of his Primarch, Typhus is imbued with the knowledge that he is favoured beyond even a wayward son of the Emperor, and as such has sundered entire planets such as Caradina 7, Protheus, Ligita, Florence, and Jonah's world with myriad plagues and contagions. Attempting to form a new Astartes Legion during 988.M41 by fusing fallen angels and Death Guard together, dubbed as the Death Angels, only through the actions of Supreme Grandmaster Azrael and Cypher were such calamitous ambitions sundered. Ordered by the Lord of Decay to bring ruin to the realm of Ultramar, following the revival of the Avenging Sun, Rabute Guilliman, once again the Traveler worked in cooperation with his Gene-Sire in order to destroy the resurgent empire of the Galactic East. Harrying the outer system of Ultramar with his vast fleet, whilst the Pale King invaded its core worlds, Typhus made clear to his Primarch that he considered him little more than a tool of war for the Grandfather, and held no loyalty nor esteem for him. Warning Mortarion that his lack of devotion made in the name of the Grandfather would endanger the success of their campaign, the words of the Traveler held true with the conclusion of their invasion. Nurgle commanded Typhus to retreat from the invasion, for riper spoils lay in wait within the Scourged Stars as the gods of Chaos fought for dominion of the war in the Rift. Abiding the demands of his patron, the Traveler left Mortarion to persecute the Plague Wars alone, and in doing so, condemned him to failure. Though slaying the Avenging Sun with a strike of his war scythe coated in the poison concoction known as the Godblight, the Master of Mankind possessed the form of the Lord of Ultramar and unleashed his limitless divine light. Setting aflame the Garden of Nurgle, the folly of Mortarion in his refusal to abide by the will of the Plague God has cost much to his domain. The Pale King endures punishment at the hands of the Grandfather, yet Typhus the Traveler fervently continues to enact the will of his patron. Billions of innocents have perished by his hand through disease, decay, or the edge of his blade, his psychic powers enabling the spread of the Grandfather's influence despite the setbacks caused by the anathema. For the gifts of Nurgle are bountiful, and none have received more favor from the Grandfather than his obedient herald.
You do not believe, not truly,
said Typhus.
You have paid nothing for your power. The false Emperor made you, Gene-Father. Nurgle took you as a prize. You are a trophy, my lord. You would never have found your way to enlightenment without me. Without me, you would have nothing. You would be dead, your soul dispersed into the warp. I fought my way into the Great Father's attention. I became his herald by your will and by the dint of my own efforts. What have you done to win his favor?
Curb your insolence, said Mortarion.
Or what, my lord? I have Nurgle's favor. You wouldn't dare to move against me. You think that you are in control, that your new being is separate from the warp, and yours to do with as you will. It is not. It is Nurgle's. You must submit to him fully, or Grandfather will have hard lessons for you. This place of yours to lead your brother on Nurgle's dance, it is ill-conceived. If we must strike, strike now. We should gather our fleets and cripple his forces while they gather at Macragge. Do not allow the luxury of time to consult with his warriors or consolidate his position.
Do not presume to tell me what to do, said Mortarion. You will work with us.
I will do as I please,
said Typhus.
If only you would abandon the lust of your being to the Lord of Life, you would see. You have no power over me. You do not truly understand. If you did, then you and I might be reconciled. The fool, the coward, and the ignorant proclaim that the warp is a realm of unknowable peril and indestructible terror, that it is the hell of countless ancient myths and legends. This is a lie, told by those whose authority is based on lies, to keep the masses terrified of the unknown. The warp is limitless in power, and its secrets are infinite. It is knowledge and strength, life and death, and the untapped potential to make and remake worlds. It takes only the discipline and the will to shape it. Those who lack that clarity of purpose are liable to be shaped by it instead. The ruinous powers are nothing if not capricious in their favor, scheming to empower their favored pawns while simultaneously enslaving them to their whims. For whilst many of the traitor legions willingly chose to tread the path of damnation, a select few fell victim to circumstance beyond their control and submit their souls as a desperate last act of survival. For today, we shall elucidate the chosen herald of the Changer of Ways and misguided genius of Arcana, the former chief librarian and exile of the Thousand Sons Legion, Arzek Ahriman. Born on the throne world of Terra during the 30th millennium, the boy known as Ahriman would be raised among the wealthy techno-barbarian society of the Achaemenid Empire. Allied to the Master of Mankind during the Wars of Unification, the society to which the boy grew was spared the atomic fires of war unleashed by the Emperor's Thunder Legion, offering their sons to be inducted into the new vanguard of humanity's burgeoning New Order. Alongside his twin brother, Ormuzd, Arzek succeeded in his trials as an aspirant to the Space Marine Legions, fighting by the side of the Emperor during the era of the Great Crusade as a member of his Thousand Sons until disaster struck. Mutations of unknown origin spread like wildfire within the ranks of the 15th Legion, their innate talent for psychic manipulation unknowingly the root cause for their hideous metamorphosis. Calls for the cull of the 15th Legion rose within the military branches of the Emperor's armies, demanding their deeds and legacy be redacted from the chronicles of the Imperium before further outbreaks wreaked havoc. The Master of Mankind looked upon his noble sons and found their hearts pure, deeming them worthy of weathering the storm until a solution to this blight could be found. Yet despite the sanction of the Emperor, Arzek Ahriman grieved, for during this time of terrible loss, his own brother, Captain Ormuzd, had submitted to the clutches of the Flesh Change and been slain. Resolving to find a cure for his legion's affliction, the loss of his twin began an ill-fated quest which would last over 10,000 years. The loss of a single soul of terror, in time, destined to be the catalyst for the torment and suffering of millions of souls. Working Ormuzd's prized possession, a pendant alike to the one worn by their mother, into his shoulder guard, Ahriman honored the service of his stalwart kinsman, who had in his short tenure proven a valiant leader and warrior. For over 3 decades, the Thousand Sons continued to aid the advance of the Great Crusade into the unknown, their relatively small numbers following the outbreak of the Flesh Change, countered by their immense versatility as savants of harnessing the Immaterium. During 840.M30, the Gene-Sire of the 15th Legion, Magnus the Red, reunited with the Master of Mankind upon the world of Prospero, the 9th of his brethren to be discovered. Having been in contact with his father throughout the subsequent years of the Great Crusade, Magnus's supreme mastery of Arcana had allowed him to prepare for the arrival of the Emperor and tutoring in the mysteries of his so-called Great Ocean. Attending to the malady of his gene-sons with haste, the Crimson King sought answers from the denizens of the Warp, bargaining in secret for a balm to prevent further disaster. Sealing a pact with the Changer of Ways, Tzeentch, under the guise of the Dweller of the Abyss, Magnus sacrificed his right eye to relieve his beloved legion of their curse. Ahriman had been unburdened of his duty to cure the Flesh Change,
Yet little would the promising scion of the Crimson King realize that such a bargain would only be temporary. For the Legion and the Imperium at large remained ignorant of the true nature of the beings of the Immaterium, an oversight which in time would damn humanity. For 5 years, Ahriman studied during his secondment to the 17th Legion, the Word-Bearers, bristling at their worship of the Master of Mankind as a human deity. Forming a bond of friendship with their first chaplain, Erebus, during his tenure, Ahriman continued to study the arts of sorcery, with surprising insights gleaned from his new comrade. Supportive of the implementation of the Remembrancer Order as a means to record and archive the many exploits of the Great Crusade as it continued to progress, any and all preservation of knowledge could only better the Imperium's collective wisdom. Hoping to one day teach the masses of humanity ways of harnessing psychic powers to better their standards of living and prosperity once the Great Crusade had ended, the naive optimism of the Thousand Sons drew the ire of several more puritanical branches of the Imperium. During a joint compliance alongside the Space Wolves Legion of the Aguru campaign, Arzek's first dealings with the Vilka Fenrika began another unlikely friendship. Ophir Weirdmake, a respected rune priest of the Rout, fought by the side of Ahriman during their compliance of the pre-industrial world, sharing with the now chief librarian of the Thousand Sons his own interpretations of the warp, and how their own teachings were derived from the primal energies of his own homeworld, Fenris. Combating Xenos weapon forms bearing similarity to the Titan legions in stature, Ahriman and Ophir proved a powerful combination when combating the as-of-yet unknown demonic entities, which were mistaken as mutated alien lifeforms. Inducting the Remembrancer, Lemuel Gomon, into the fold of the Thousand Sons under the express orders of his Primarch, Ahriman took on the fledgling Psyker as his own probationer and imparted the many teachings of Prospero's vaunted mastery of the warp. Allowing Gomon to accompany the Legion during combat operations fought on the world of Heliosa, to the collective horror of the Thousand Sons on this fateful battle, the flesh change once again broke out within their ranks. Stung at the realization that his burden had not, in fact, been absolved by his Primarch, Ahriman's emotions could not be concealed from the presence of Gomon, nor those who fought by his side. Fighting once more alongside the Rout and reinforcements of the Word-Bearers during the pacification of the Arcreach cluster, during the Thousand Sons' defense of the repositories of the planet's esoteric knowledge, conflict within their allies' ranks ensued. Decrying the 15th Legion's preservation of corrupted knowledge, the Rout charged into their lines, seeking to burn and destroy every vestige of unclean arcanum upon the world of Shrike. The flesh change once more erupting within their ranks, witnessed by the Vilka Fenrika. With the intervention of the Wolf King himself, the Crimson King could no longer hide his Legion's curse. Calling for the censure of Psykers within the Legiones Astartes following the Ulanor triumph, the Space Wolves alongside the Death Guard Legion called for a conclave to decide the fate of the Librarius. Mortarion, Primarch of the 14th Legion, decried the misuse of the Immaterium due to his upbringing on a world of malevolent necromancers, whilst the Rout offered their own witness to give his account of treachery. Rune Priest Ophir Weirdmake, feigned friend of Arzek, proclaimed the Thousand Sons to be proponents of foul magics, too dangerous to be sanctioned to continue their arcane arts, as members of their own legion mutated into abominations wrought by their sorceries. Unwilling to allow such dangerous outbursts of chaotic corruption to continue, the Master of Mankind ordained that each legion must disband their Librarius and swear never to use the powers of the warp henceforth. The Thousand Sons championed virtue. Their mastery of the Immaterium had now been abolished, robbing them not only of their fighting prowess, but also identity as a legion. Feelings of betrayal grew within the hearts of the Astartes of the 15th Legion, most of all their chief librarian, whose naivety to confide in Weirdmake had been used to condemn his men. Confronting his Primarch on the true nature of their affliction, Ahriman learned not only of his gene-sized concealment of the denizens of the warp, but also the revelation of the pact made to cure the flesh change. Unable to deny the accusations levied at his legion,
Ahriman realized that the misuse of unknown and fell powers were true. The justification of the Master of Mankind's decision to deny his legion's birthright made clear, and trust in his Primarch shattered. Yet as Ahriman steeled himself to act, the Crimson King used his immense psychic might to obscure the knowledge within Arzek's mind, removing the details of the deal he had made and nature of his fell benefactors. As captain of the First Fellowship, even a being as powerful as the master of the Corvidae cult could not be seen defying the will of the monarch of Prospero. And as the Legion wrestled with their shame, the first act of grand heresy began to stir. Upon the world of Darwin, the War Master of the Imperium, Horus Lupercal, began his first steps to damnation, whilst the Thousand Sons, in direct breach of the Emperor's decree, continued their studies of the Immaterium. Masters of precognition, the Corvidae cult leaders, Ahriman and Ankuanen, the guardian of the Great Library of Prospero, sensed something was amiss within the shifting fates of the galaxy. The Crimson King had attempted to sway his brother from the path of ruin, his efforts unable to prevent the first calamitous fall from grace of the Emperor's noble sons. Foreseeing the terrible future which mankind would inherit, the Crimson King ordered his most trusted and powerful sons to aid his psychic projection to the throne world of Terra. Each captain of the fellowships bolstered their liege lord's psychic might, allowing him to reach the throne world with news, forewarning the impending betrayal. Breaching the psychic wards of the Imperial Palace, the Crimson King, in his ignorance of the Emperor's Webway project, breached his father's meticulously planned seizure of the Eldar's means of galactic traversal. Magnus the Red had forever damned humanity to use the warp as a means of galactic travel, damning billions of future pilgrims to be tormented by the forces of chaos. Enraged at the careless actions and flagrant perfidy of his son, the Master of Mankind dispatched the Wolf King, Leman Russ, to bring the Thousand Sons to Terra for judgment. All too eager to humble the Thousand Sons, the Vilca Fenrica voyaged to their homeworld of Prospero, reinforced with members of the Legio Custodes and Silent Sisterhood. Their orders manipulated by the as-of-yet unknowingly treacherous War Master, Horus Lupercal gave his blessing to use deadly force to purge the Sons of Magnus. Unleashing the full might of Fenris and Terra upon the homeworld of the 15th Legion, Prospero burned as its populace and defense forces reeled at the sudden attack. The actions of the impending assault concealed by the Crimson King as he stewed in his self-doubt and grief for his arrogance, Magnus murdered the captain of the Fifth Fellowship and brainwashed his own people in order to hasten their purge by the rout. Unwilling to allow the wholesale slaughter of the people of his new homeworld, Ahriman rallied the Thousand Sons to combat the forces of the Emperor, reinforcing the city of Tizca as his own Primarch sat idle within his throne room. Thousands upon thousands of Prosperines perished as warriors of grey and gold tore through the streets of Tizca. The remainder of the planet's cities turned to ash outside the protective kind shields conjured around the capital. As the feral masses of the Wolfen roared their cries within proximity of Tizca's last imposing pyramid, Magnus finally rose to action. Confronting the Wolf King in single combat, Ahriman and his peers witnessed the deadly duel between the Emperor's sons, ending with Magnus laying broken at the feet of Leman Russ. Submitting a portion of his soul in service to the Changer of Waves, with his last act of strength, the Crimson King, now imbued with ruinous power, summoned a warp gateway leading directly to the heart of the Eye of Terror. As Ahriman activated the jade emblems fitted to the breastplate of each of his legions Astartes, the Thousand Sons joined their Primarch as the city of Tizca teleported to the demon world of Sortiarius. The 15th Legion had suffered much in the final days of the Great Crusade, yet for now they were marked as traitors to the Imperium they had given everything to defend. However, with the shackles of the Emperor now broken, the curiosity and meddling of the Sons of Prospero were now boundless, and upon their newly established planet of the Sorcerers, their patronage to the Chaos God, Tzeentch, further bolstered their already powerful Arcanum. Following the end of the Horus Heresy, Magnus the Red now stood as a transformed demon prince, his once frail visage cast down by the Wolf King, transformed into an imposing giant, yet the bargain made with his new patron had shattered his essence into shards. Distrustful and resentful of the new form his Primarch had taken, Ahriman's contempt for his powerful, yet weak in spirit liege had begun to spread. Magnus's naivety, deceit, and hubris had cost the Thousand Sons throughout their service to the Emperor, and in the end damned them as betrayers of the empire they once cherished. Knowing his Genesire to now be focused solely on revenge against his father, rather than finding a cure for his Genesons, Ahriman took to finding a cure with renewed vigor. Delving into the tome of his Primarch's combined volumes of knowledge, the Book of Magnus, Arzek combed through various incantations, rituals, and formulae in search of a solution for the flesh change. Devising a concoction of myriad arcane conjurations, which would undo the affliction to their gene line once and for all, Ahriman dubbed his spell the Rubric. Yet for all his genius, Ahriman still lacked the raw psychic might to activate such magic. Unwilling to involve his Primarch to conduct the ritual, Ahriman gathered the most loyal officers of his legion, sympathetic to his cause. His Cabal enacting the Rubric. Flowing through each and every member of the Thousand Sons, the Rubric enhanced the psychic powers of less than 100 of their remaining most capable warriors, yet rendered the remaining members of the Legion into little more than dust. Unable to contain the raw essence of the Immaterium coursing through their bodies, the least gifted perished whilst their power siphoned into their superiors, the ceramite of their armor constraining the inferno inside their shells until their victims turned to ash. Sealing the joints of their armor and trapping their souls within their husks, the Rubric Marines maintained the merest functions of sentience. Distraught at the results of his experiment, Ahriman wept to see his actions bring further misfortune to his brethren, his Rubric preventing the flesh change insofar as preventing the transformation by denying any vestige of tissue. The vast majority of the Sons of Prospero were now little more than automata, the Crimson King wrathful as he beheld his legion of ghosts. Assaulting the site from where the coven of his chief librarian had enacted their ritual, the Cabal knelt before the Crimson King, with one exception: Ahriman. Remaining indignant to his father's fury, Arzek showed no signs of repentance, for in his heart he knew that his actions were ultimately the fallout of his Primarch's own mistakes, an act made in desperation, wrought by Magnus's own blunders. Preparing to strike down Ahriman, Magnus's hand would be stayed by the architect of fate, Tzeentch, proclaiming Ahriman to be destined to one day be among his greatest champions, under the protection of his favor. Unable to slay his renegade son, Magnus the Red banished Ahriman and his Cabal from the planet of the sorcerers, commanding them to never again sully his domain. Accompanied by the mentor of his Primarch, Amon, Ahriman and his Cabal ventured into the void, continuing their search for a means to return their ashen kindred into their previous forms of flesh and blood. For 1,000 years, Ahriman and his compatriots furthered their quest for knowledge, in time splitting off into disparate warbands to better achieve their goals. Amon founded the Brotherhood of Dust, in time gathering small fleets, apprentices, and orphan Chaos Space Marines to aid his cause. Powerful Chaos Sorcerers would outgrow their allegiance to his warband, some in time forming their own warbands in turn, and abandoning the quest to better pursue their own path to glory. Yet none could match the talent for sorcery of the former Chief Librarian of the Thousand Sons, his promise to restore the phantoms he had created, superseding petty grabs for power within a broken galaxy. Armed with the Black Staff of Ahriman, capable of bending reality to his whim, every component of this powerful Force Staff, from its bladed tip to its charred haft, is a relic claimed from untold warlords and war zones. Bound together by a foul ritual which sends screams of agony through the Immaterium, those gifted with psychic powers see not a simple staff, but a blazing black scar of immaterial essence. With time, Amon dispatched emissaries to uncover any and all rumors of Ahriman's dealings, eventually finding his estranged kinsman to be serving within the Khornate warband known as the Harrowing. Sending the former member of Ahriman's original cabal, Tolbec, to meet with the exile. Aboard the Voidcraft Blood Crescent, Tolbec identified the clandestine sorcerer, posing as the lowly initiate, Korkos. Killing the majority of the warband through use of psychic means, now that his identity was compromised. Ahriman invaded Tolbec's mind in order to find answers. Warp immolating himself to prevent such answers from being uncovered, the former pirate cultist gave no information to the exile, causing Ahriman to seize the Blood Crescent and venture forth to uncover the truth. Staving off pawns of the Warp in thrall to the will of Amon, Ahriman with time infiltrated his aggressor's fleet, intending to confront him. Betrayed by the Blood Crescent ship mistress, Ahriman, despite sustaining injuries, slew 3 Chaos Sorcerers in service to Amon before facing him in the flesh. Teleported to Amon's flagship, Sycorax, Ahriman endured imprisonment and interrogation for a means to undo the rubric. Rescued by the few allies that remained to him, Ahriman escaped his confinement and psychically dueled Amon, revealing that the rubric had linked all Thousand Sons into a collective power, binding their might to his own will. Unleashing such power upon Amon, the foster father of Magnus combust into psychic flame, using the rubric contained within his own form. The outburst of power enveloping Ahriman. Now empowered with the stolen essence of Amon, Ahriman summoned flames to surround the Rubricae Marines, once in service to the captain of the Ninth Fellowship, turning their red and silver ceramite into shades of polished sapphire blue. Usurping control of the Brotherhood of Dust, many speculate the remnants of Amon's warband to with time to become Ahriman's current armies, known as the Prodigal Sons. Regardless, Ahriman had silenced a former rival of his legion, and now ruled over any army in excess to even the mightiest Space Marine chapters and Chaos warbands, and with it would achieve his own objectives for the millennia to come. Committing untold acts of cruelty across the void of space in order to further his understanding of the Warp and means to cure his fallen legion, Arzek Ahriman's ruthless nature could fill volumes of records. Stealing the collective knowledge of the archive world of Calliope, what would go down in Imperial history as the Harvest of Calliope rendered the populace little more than malnourished vermin writhing within the dehydrated corpses of the dead. Every data store, page of parchment, and archive pilfered of all knowledge within its bountiful libraries and repositories, the exile of the Thousand Sons had fostered the formation of a faction, known as the Summation, created to labor only to compile the planet's collective knowledge into a seemingly endless formula. After the toil of billions bred this immense inscription of sigils, rendering the planet silent on the moment of its completion, the populace's minds wiped, leaving only a single image of Ahriman descending from a tear in real space to claim his millennia in the making bounty. Claiming the silvered skull of Lepidus from the world of Dianaxis, Ahriman unleashed demonic hordes upon the Mausoleum world, summoned with the alignment of countless extinct worlds devastated by his own hand as servants of the ruinous powers poured from a wound rent into the system's solar body. Sundering loyal Space Marines, Imperial Guardsmen, and the warlord Titan Firebane of the Legio Officium, all the death and devastation made to claim the relic of the Second Black Crusade of Abaddon the Despoiler bore meaning of a singular word etched onto its silver surface. Memorizing the inscription before dropping the skull of Lepidus to the ground, the exile vanished alongside his Rubricae, leaving the demonic entities to feast on the souls of Dianaxis. Yet the crimes of Ahriman are not reserved only for the defenders of humanity, for even to this day, the exile works tirelessly to one day raid the Black Library of the Eldar Empire. The mobile bastion of the Eldar's collective insight, hidden within the webway, Arzek has on one occasion managed to bypass the defenses of the Sanctum's guardians, the Harlequins. Telepathically projecting his form into the inner sanctum of the Black Library, Ahriman hastily transcribed a single hermetic parchment from its archives using his physical body before being banished. Transcribing a copy of the Tome Labyrinthus, which marks the hidden passageways to the webway. The Harlequins hunt the exile to this day, in their attempts to censure their stolen wisdom. Yet possibly the most heinous of Ahriman's crimes, prior to the time of ending, is the siege of Fenris. Summoned back to the planet of the sorcerers by Magnus the Red, Ahriman begrudgingly collaborated with his estranged Primarch in a mutual campaign to humble the Space Wolves, surrounding Fenris with warp storms, allowing for the invasion of a massive demonic incursion. The Sons of Russ's fortunes would be salvaged with the arrival of reinforcements from the Grey Knights and Dark Angels chapters. Mortal Imperial forces were coerced into fighting one another due to the actions of the Servant of Tzeentch, the Changeling. Each warp storm surrounding the planet conjured into a pattern not seen in 10,000 years. Last sighted upon the world of Prospero, the warp alignment allowed for the 9 silver towers of the planet of the sorcerers to arrange in the skies above Fenris, each unleashing hordes of the Thousand Suns onto the surface of Fenris. Infiltrating behind the Space Wolves' battle lines by utilizing the webway, Ahriman's prodigal sons caught the Vilka Fenrika by surprise, turning many members of the rout to ash with psychic flame. The Silver Towers stood atop the geomantic sites of power of Fenris, siphoning its mysterious energies until the skies of the Space Wolves' homeworld burst into flames, boiling captured Space Wolves within each spire until nothing remained but melted gore. Summoning Magnus the Red to the material realm with such bitter acts of hatred, Ahriman stood by the side of his Primarch as they conducted fell rituals to summon demons within the heart of the Fang's magma-powered energy sources. The Silver Towers banished with the destruction of the planet of Midgardia by Logan Grimnar. Regardless of his actions, Magnus had achieved what he sought to accomplish. Thanks to the efforts of Ahriman, the Crimson King harnessed the pilfered energies of Fenris to bring the planet of the sorcerers to real space, now orbiting the celestial body of their original homeworld, Prospero. Sortiarius is a blight upon the stars, now untethered from the Immaterium. Despite inflicting such a deadly blow to their arch-nemesis, the Thousand Suns were by no means content during the final days of the 41st millennium. Once more invading the Black Library for knowledge due to its immense value proven during the Siege of Fenris, Ahriman captured the only Inquisitor deemed worthy to be invited to be a guest of the Asuriani craft world, Sebak, for information. In truth, invited as bait to force Ahriman's hand, the Eldar ambushed the exile during his second infiltration of the Webway. Confronted by the Ulfway Farseer, Eldrad Ulfran, Ahriman's use of a long-forgotten Webway gate on the world of Etaemnum Free, once repelled from its breach, would be sealed by Eldrad. Capitalizing on a tear in the Webway, inadvertently caused by the librarians of the Bloodraven chapter, following his failed second infiltration, Arzek traveled to the world of Arcadia, the Eldari planet of Lore. Once more facing the Harlequin Order, Ahriman located a Webway portal to the Black Library, using the tome of Kerabenian claimed from the Harlequin Solitaire who once guarded it. Seeking the Sword of Lanfralak as his secondary objective, an ancient weapon of the War in Heaven, his efforts would ultimately be denied by the Guardians of Arcadia. For should Ahriman ever achieve his goal of securing the Black Library, it is rumored that he shall ascend to the stature of a god of chaos using the combined knowledge of the Eldar. Aware of the resurrection of the Inari as a sign that their methods might be used to give rebirth to his fallen kinsmen, following the fall of Cadia, the exile once again invaded the Webway. Ambushing the Eldar en route to the moon of Clasus, Ahriman sacrificed 99 captive prisoners of war in order to conduct a ritual to transport his forces to the location of the Inari. Carnage ensued within the Webway as the triumvirate of Iniad confronted the sorcerers' armies, with Ahriman dragging the champions of the Eldar god of the dead to the outskirts of the Webway. Restoring a dozen Rubric Marines to their former state of life, Yvraine, the Daughter of Shades, demonstrated her mastery over the forces of life and death to allow for their escape. Severing the Webway tunnel by use of a Wraith Knight, the Vizarch of the Avatar of Iniad, Yin Khan pulled the now living Thousand Suns into the chasm by inhaling deeply, dragging them to their deaths. Grief-stricken that his men had perished with such cruelty so shortly after their resurrection, Ahriman, regardless of his woes, now knew the Eldar held the means to salvage his legion. Gathering resources and military might, as the Cicatrix Maledictum split the galaxy in two, Ahriman's 10,000-year odyssey as the Exile is tantalizingly close to its end. Seeking ancient Necron technologies in order to turn their skeins of time in his favor, no matter the advancements made in his pursuit of absolution, many believe all hope of reversing the rubric to be nothing more than smoke and mirrors. For with every step closer to achieving his goal, the Herald of Tzeentch perversely never comes closer to achieving redemption. A fitting fate for the champion of a god of scheming and treachery. And what are the achievements of your fragile Imperium? It is a corpse, rotting slowly from within while maggots writhe in its belly. It was built with the toil of heroes and giants, and now it is inhabited by frightened weaklings to whom the glories of those times are half-forgotten legends. I have forgotten nothing, and my wisdom has expanded far beyond mere mortal frailties.
This Imperium is ours. We fought for it. We built it with blood and sweat and wrath. We forged it with the worlds we took. The Empire is built upon foundations of our brothers' bones. We didn't rebel out of petty spite, Sigismund. We rebelled because our Lord and Master played us false. We were useful tools to bring the galaxy to heel, but he would have cleansed us from the Imperium the way he purged the Thunder Legion before us, wiping us all from history like excrement from his golden boots.
The Imperium of Man has forged heroes and saints aplenty. Its righteous vision of a united species, lionizing humble souls and perfect demigods alike, for their valiant deeds made in the name of the Emperor. However, it must not be forgotten that the legacy of humanity has also spawned terrible monsters, twisted through malice, treachery, and bitterness. While statues still stand of legends epitomizing the Emperor's ideals, far more have been torn down of those who stood in opposition to the master of mankind. For today, we shall elucidate a warrior descended from the legacy of the Emperor's most cherished son, who abused each and every advantage possible to achieve his goals. The chosen war master of Chaos Undivided, Abaddon, the Despoiler. During the era of the 31st millennium, the Emperor required peerless warriors to embark upon his great crusade to reclaim the stars. 20 legions would be sired to raise soldiers made in the image of his noble sons, the Primarchs, each inheriting the virtues and strengths of their indomitable gene-sires. First among equals stood Horus Lupercal, protege of the Master of Mankind and leader of the 16th Legion, the Lunar Wolves. Drawing recruits from the homeworld of the Lupercal, Cophonia, this hive of warlords and criminal scum would prove a fitting recruitment ground to sire new members of this elite band of shock troopers, clad in marble ceramite. To lead such a band of killers, a soul of singular purpose and fortitude would be required. The rank of first captain of the Legiones Astartes, reserved only for men of superb martial skill and tactical brilliance. Within the streets of Cophonia, a young killer roamed, living in exile following the murder of his father, Ezekiel Abaddon. Imposing in stature, even as a mortal, the Cophonian people regarded this mysterious nomad with fear and begrudging respect, his reputation gaining the notice of Horus with his ascension as Primarch of the 16th Legion. Drafted into the fold of the Lunar Wolves, it would not take long for Abaddon to rise through the ranks, achieving the position of first captain mere years after his induction. Entrusted with an ornate suit of cataphracti pattern Terminator armor to contain his hulking form, his pedigree in battle would prove as the example for the elite first company to follow, the Justaerin. Alike to a warrior king of yore, Horus trusted his acolyte implicitly as his most capable commander, bodyguard, and advisor. his reputation known throughout the entirety of the Legiones Astartes. Just as Horus was regarded as the most cherished of the Primarchs, so too did Abaddon benefit as the pinnacle of the Astartes creed. Forming a fraternity of brotherhood within the Lunar Wolves, the Mournival, to foster camaraderie and a means to share critiques, regardless of standing. The humility of Horus's demeanor was adopted by Abaddon to better his own standing as a leader of men. Standing at the side of 2nd Captain Tarik Torgadon, 4th Captain Little Horus Aximand, and 10th Captain Garviel Loken, the Mournival honored the sacrifices of distinguished fallen members such as Kashen, Minos, Berabadon, Deridadon, Caradon, Lytus, Janipur, Sirakul, and Hastur Sejanus. Yet as the 16th Legion's glories burgeoned with their Primarch's ascension to the position of War Master, just as their heraldry and title as the Sons of Horus changed, so too did their fortunes. Upon the world of Darwin, the clandestine schemes of the ruinous powers began to coalesce. Aided by the manipulations of First Chaplain of the Word-Bearers, Erebus, while within the ranks of the War Master's retinue. Stealing the fell artifact, the Kinabrak Anathame, from the splinter fleet of humanity, the Interrex, Erebus entrusted the weapon to the planetary governor of the compliant world of Darwin, as whispers of the plague god, Nurgle, began to take root within his soul. Returning to Darwin to find its surface festering with disgusting undead abominations, the Sons of Horus made planetfall, led by their Primarch, as they sought to destroy the heart of the world's corrupting influence. Confronting the disgustingly bloated form of Temba in single combat, the chaos-infused monster drove the edge of the Anathame deep into Horus's flesh before being sundered by the War Master. Succumbing to the toxins coating its edge, Horus fell into a comatose state as Abaddon and his Mournival retrieved his body and returned it to the Apothecarion of their legion. Unable to revive the Primarch with the most advanced medical facilities available to them, the unnatural affliction had somehow bested the seemingly perfect immune system of their liege. Grief-stricken at the sight of his cherished Gene-Father's condition, and desperate for any means to bring him back to health, Abaddon acceded to the advisements of Erebus to bring the War Master to the care of strange mystic healers located on the nearby moon of Darwin. In truth, servants of the ruinous powers, despite the protestation of Tarik Torgadon and Garviel Loken, Abaddon allowed the Chaos Sorcerers to administer to the wounds of Horus. Restored in body, but not in mind, the Lupercal rose with bitterness in his heart and treachery in his soul, the malevolent power coursing through him, nurturing his self-doubt into a weapon which could be turned against the Emperor. Relieved to see his master restored, Abaddon blindly followed the example set by his War Master, unquestioning in his allegiance to continue to serve, as the first act of treachery marked the beginning of the Horus heresy. Purging the ranks of his own legion, of those whose loyalties to the Master of Mankind eclipsed that of their Primarch, upon the soil of Istvan Free, Abaddon ordered his once trusted brethren, Loken and Torgadon, to purge the planet of rebellious human elements. Unleashing devastation upon the loyalists who fought and bled on its surface, Abaddon observed the death of thousands of his kinsmen, ordained unworthy by his master. Purging the surviving resistance, alongside the legions of the Emperor's children, World Eaters and Death Guard, Ezekiel alongside his brother Aximand confronted their Mournival brothers. As Aximand slew Torgadon in single combat, Abaddon clashed with Loken, injuring the 10th Captain before withdrawing to allow the guns of the Vengeful Spirit to bury the wounded wolf beneath the debris wrought by its bombardment. Over the next 7 years of brutal conflict, the Sons of Horus preyed on the fragmented loyalist outposts among the stars. Complicit in the shattering of the Iron Hands, Salamanders and Raven Guard during the Istvan V Dropside Massacre, as would be characteristic for the remainder of the war, the Sons of Horus would be held in reserve. Deployed only for the most dangerous and important missions, the Blackclad Justaran elite, with Abaddon at their spear tip, were unleashed only sparingly, whilst Horus selfishly hurled his brother legions into the fray in order to preserve his own men. Confronted by Garviel Loken at the head of his band of orphaned Astartes, the Knights Errant, during their infiltration of the Vengeful Spirit, years following the Istvan III atrocity, Abaddon's men forced his wayward kinsmen to submit before bringing them to the feet of his Primarch to be judged. Offering Loken a chance to rejoin the Sons of Horus to fight by his side once more, Garviel Loken refused to betray the will of the Emperor. Escaping the clutches of death once more, Loken's strike force had paved the way for the Space Wolves Legion to board the War Master's flagship, laying runic markings to lead them straight to the ship's epicenter, the Lupercal's court. Observing the War Master's injury at the hands of the Wolf King, Leman Russ, the wound inflicted by the Dionysian spear galvanized the stranglehold of the ruinous powers over their champion. Wary of his Primarch's seeming lack of free will, as the tendrils of chaos bored deeper into his soul, Abaddon, regardless of the events of the Battle of Yarant, rallied his forces to make the final push to the throne world. Unleashing the full might of the traitor rebellion upon Terra, the War Master's civil war culminated in the single most devastating battle ever waged by humanity. Untold billions of mortals and thousands of Astartes soaked the earth of Terra with their blood. Yet for all the battles waged to push into the heart of the Imperial Palace, the War Master himself remained far from the front lines. Too valuable to be lost in the meat grinder of war, Abaddon fought in the place of his Genesire, growing restless with the stubborn defiance of the Loyalists and ever more disdainful of the War Master's absence. Leading a surgical strike to infiltrate the Imperial Palace orchestrated by the Iron Warrior's Primarch, Perturabo, Abaddon came close to perishing at the hands of the combined might of Nathaniel Garro, Bel Sepatus, and Endred Ha, killing the Riven Hound and Blood Angel during the 13-minute-long melee despite incurring several mortal wounds. Escaping from the disastrous battle as the siege began to protract to the traitor's detriment, drastic matters were required to conclude the battle, for reinforcements of the Dark Angels and Ultramarines would soon join the fray. Upon the bridge of the Vengeful Spirit, the climactic final battle for humanity waged, the Master of Mankind himself dueling the Champion of Chaos, as Abaddon, allied with the Wordbearers, stalled the Custodian Guard from aiding the Emperor. Knowing even his skill to be insufficient when facing the Captain General of the Golden Host, Constantin Valdor, Abaddon allowed the influence of chaos to briefly empower his form. Grabbing the Apollonian spear by its tip as Abaddon's blood dripped from his clutched fist around its blade, Valdor saw in an instant the destiny of this terrible foe. Its innate ability to grant insight into those it cut directly to its master, Valdor uttered a single word following the terrible influx of knowledge: Despoiler. Letting go of the spear in an act unthinkable of any member of the Legio Custodes, Valdor struck Abaddon with his fist before being jettisoned from the ship's confines. Horus Lupercal was destined to perish at the hands of the Emperor, yet Valdor had bore witness to the terrible future which his inheritor would enact. With the War Master slain, the traitors withdrew from the siege, the lifeless body of Horus held tightly by Abaddon as he detached his power claw and vowed to one day use its talons to rend what remained of the Emperor to ribbons. Once more reuniting with Garviel Loken, as the Sons of Horus beheld the corpse of their once noble liege, Abaddon refused to kill his kinsman, with no cause left to fight for. Offering Abaddon and his Justerin a chance to surrender, Loken, for all their differences, promised to negotiate leniency from Primarch Rabute Guilliman when the Ultramarines inevitably reached Terra. Stabbed in the back by Erebus, to prevent any chance of reconciliation, Loken's lifeless body fell into the arms of Abaddon as the life fled from his body. Retreating with the Vengeful Spirit, as the Loyalists rushed to inter the Emperor upon the Golden Throne, the final opportunity for Ezekal to turn from the path of utter damnation was gone. For now, the ruinous powers required a new champion to carry out their malevolent desires. Escaping the wrath of the Great Scouring for many years, Ezekal Abaddon roamed the stars as a pilgrim seeking purpose. His homeworld, Cathonia, ground to dust by the Loyalists, his Genesire's very soul cleansed from existence, and Legion devoid of a cause to fight for, Abaddon abandoned his men as they took refuge within the Eye of Terror. Harassed by the broken remnants of their former allies, as traitor Astartes fought for petty ambitions and power, Nothing of value could tempt the former first captain to join the Legion Wars. Wandering the expanse of the Eye of Terror, alone, within the deepest recesses of the Immaterium, Abaddon busied himself uncovering the mysteries which the ruinous powers so greedily obscured. His dark pilgrimage, encompassing thousands of worlds within the Ocularis Terribus, with the passage of a millennia, the Sons of Horus constructed a new headquarters upon the demon world of Malium. Interring the body of Horus within a great tomb, the Lupercalios, despite the Legion's fortification of a vast stronghold around the mausoleum, stagnation began to spread within their ranks. Their disorganization leading to the theft of the War Master's corpse by the Emperor's children, now fully empowered by She Who Firsts, Slaanesh. Under orders of their chief apothecary, Fabius Bile, the 3rd Legion delivered the Lupercal's body to his care on the world of Harmony, as he conducted experiments to recreate the genius crafted by the Emperor. Following the utter devastation of the Lupercalios, acting commander of the Sons of Horus, Falcus Kyber, allied with the warband leaders, Thousand Sun Sorcerer Iskandar Kion, and World Eater Leovine Ukris. Assembling his allies within the derelict Voidcraft, his chosen son, the Widowmaker, informed them of the fall of the monument of Horus and danger posed by Fabius's toil. Should the Spider achieve his goal of crafting a Primarch to bend to his own will, his legion of reprobates would be unstoppable. The danger posed by such a power imbalance, threatening to destroy the few vestiges of power that they each in turn possessed. Seeking out the vengeful spirit to recruit its vast arsenal and master to lead their cause, Kyber and his allies located the Gloriana vessel, which had eluded so many for centuries of exploration, with the insight of the jaded son of Lorgar Aurelian, Sargon. Having cast aside the teachings of his own Primarch, Sargon, though no longer capable of speech due to his plasma burn injury incurred during the Battle of Terror, spoke through the reanimated corpses of the fallen to direct their venture to the radiant worlds of the Elysian Vale. Locating the Warp Storm, blockaded by a fleet of Emperor's Children Voidcraft, Kyber's 5 warships, outnumbered by 7, required a parley to allow for safe passage. Meeting with the Warband's leader, Cadalus Orlantia, upon his flagship, the Perfection's Lament, the Chemosian commander demanded they hand over Sargon. Refusing to give up the former word-bearer, the pilgrims escaped the ensuing skirmish thanks to Kion's mastery of sorcery. Breaching the blockade and venturing to the Elysian Vale, Kion's insight into the secret webway pathways of the Avernus Breach proved crucial in allowing his vessel, the Talalok, to reach the Radiant Worlds. Descending upon the remnants of the former Eldar world of Ayes Sayaral, the Heart Song, Kyber and his band of warriors discovered the buried remains of the vengeful spirit. Searching its vast confines for any signs of life, eventually, after hours of searching, the form of a giant stood within the darkness. Clad in armor, scavenged from every traitor legion, 2 gleaming eyes of gold stared from behind a mass of long, clustered black hair. Beholding the scarred face of Ezekiel Abaddon, Kyber and his allies beseeched the former first captain to return to the fold of the traitor struggle. Explaining that he had summoned them to his presence intentionally, it was Abaddon that had dispatched Sargon to lure them to the vengeful spirit. Recognizing this band of misfits to be bereft of their Genefather's guidance, nor loyalty to their legions of origin, Sargon's insights had seen in them a catalyst to restore the war against the Imperium anew. Understanding the need to prevent the sacrificed king from once again dooming what remained of their forces to another fruitless conflict, Abaddon's hopes of allowing his legion to die with some fragment of dignity was now dashed by the temerity of the Emperor's children. Offering the assembled Astartes a chance to form a new creed under his banner, to once again fight as soldiers rather than squabbling rabble, his new Black Legion would echo forevermore, not as barbarians struggling for scraps, but a true army seeking nothing less than dominion of the void. A true war, the Long War, would from the ashes of defeat surpass everything his failed father had hoped to achieve, and they would do it without his influence nor objective to offer humanity conquered to the capricious, ruinous powers. United in purpose, Abaddon's Ezekarion gathered upon the bridge of the Vengeful Spirit and ventured to Fabius Baal's stronghold of harmony, the Canticle City, Iskander Kion enduring several months of meditation, dragging his unmanned vessel, the Talalok, with them. Arriving in orbit of harmony, Kion hurled his immense 8-megaton voidcraft to collide with the Canticle City. The destruction wrought from the gargantuan impact, causing tectonic shifts and obliterating its target. Picking off fleeing vessels, escaping the death of the planet with the guns of the Vengeful Spirit, Sargon identified that the Lunar-class cruiser, Pulchridudinus, housed their charge. Boarding the vessel, regarded by the 3rd Legion as the Flesh Market, the Ezekarion confronted Fabius Baal and demanded he surrender the Primarch's body. Observing the imposing form of Horus, clutching the immense power maul, Worldbreaker, Abaddon wielded the talon which he had claimed, the blood of the great angel and master of mankind still staining its edge. Catching the strike of Worldbreaker within his talon, Abaddon broke its haft with his grip, before driving its 5 keen-edged claws deep into the chest of his cloned Genesire, and firing a volley of 6 bolts from its wrist-mounted Stormbolter. Destroying all trace of the Clone Lord's experiments to recreate the Primarchs, Abaddon usurped the legacy of the Lupercal and anointed himself as the true War Master of Chaos. His last words spoken to the slain Lupercal moments before his demise: "I am not your son." Cannibalizing the remnants of the Sons of Horus and aimless warbands into the fold of his new Black Legion, from shame and shadow, they would be recast, in black and gold reborn. Allowing for praise of or rejection of any of the Pantheon, all were welcome to pledge their fealty to the Band of the Despoiler, their pledge to follow his orders in efforts to overthrow the Corpse Emperor of mankind, all that was demanded. Slaughtering any who refused his offer to join the Black Legion, none remained of the former Sons of Horus who could contest his reign as the true inheritor of the Lupercal. Those who betrayed their oaths were relentlessly purged by the most capable servants of the War Master, forging alliances with warbands who proved capable in collaborating with his ambitions. Even the Demon Primarchs accede to the demands of the Despoiler should their objectives align. Repainting their ceramite, no matter its former configuration nor heraldry, into black and gold, the sight of the heralds of the Long War promises slaughter on a scale not seen since the darkest days of the Great Civil War. Bestowed the mark of Chaos Ascendant as proof of the favor of the entire Pantheon of Chaos, Abaddon is perhaps the single most deadly foe the Imperium has ever faced. Shrugging off direct volleys from even Baneblade tanks due to the layers of demonic wards and protections to his already impressive panoply of war, his ancient Cataphracti Terminator armor incorporates several runes and technological marvels. Armed with the Talon of Horus, still stained with the blood of the Emperor, Sanguinius, and Horus, this relic of murder exudes an aura of distilled evil which disturbs all who near its presence. Claiming the demon sword, Draknien, containing the echo of the first human murder, the Shard of Madness hungers for the chance to slay the Emperor, empowering its edge to carve through almost any defense. Launching a number of Black Crusades over the course of 10 millennia, though few understand the objectives of Abaddon's campaigns, it is said that all have been crucial to paving his patient path to destroy the Throne World. Most infamous of all such conflicts would be known as the 13th Black Crusade, the fallout from such calamity destroying the fortress world of Cadia, which has led to the birth of the Cicatrix Maledictum, cleaving the galaxy in twain. Learning of the resurgence of the Avenging Sun, Roboute Guilliman, following the destruction of Cadia, Abaddon dispatched his Black Legion to lay siege to Ultramar itself, hoping to prevent the revival of Roboute Guilliman and resurgence of the Imperium. Driven from Macragge by the Lord of Ultramar, though the Black Legion failed to defeat the Ultramarines, they had nonetheless inflicted a crippling blow upon Ultramar, which the forces of the Death Guard and their Primarch, Mortarion, would exploit during the Plague Wars. Humbling the Lord of Macragge, Marneus Calgar, during the Vigilus campaign, despite the best efforts of the venerated chapter master of the Ultramarines, his duel with the Despoiler incurred wounds to both his hearts, despite breaking Abaddon's jaw. laying waste to countless fiefdoms, pillaging untold riches to achieve his ultimate goal, his alliance with the Chaos entity, Vashtor the Archifane, during the Arcs of Omen campaign, has emboldened the Despoiler to new heights of power. Aiding the Lords of the Forge of Souls by retrieving the fragments of a key of bone and brass, upon the homeworld of the Iron Angel Space Marine chapter, Maglodor, Abaddon slew its chapter master and laid claim to the first piece of the key. Rallying all his subjects to seek out the remaining fragments, Abaddon witnessed the summoning of dozens of Space Hulks, known as the Arcs of Omen by the Archifane. Entrusting his most capable commanders to helm each Space Hulk as reward for service pledged, Abaddon's Bale fleets sowed ruin and devastation upon all corners of the void in search of the ominous relics. Collaborating with the Red Angel, Angron, and his resurgent legion of the World Eaters to lay siege to the world of Malak Bale, their hatred of all psychic phenomena fueled their purge of the beacon, known as the Coral Engine. Sundering the beacon during the Battle of Malak, and unleashing a murder curse from its explosion, a warp rift of immense size erupted, spilling forth demons of the Blood God, allowing Vashtor to retrieve its core once the din of battle subsided. As Vashtor harried the forces of the Dark Angels, wary of the awakening of their indomitable Primarch Lionel Johnson, though the first Demon Prince of Chaos, Be'lakor, had been dispatched to fight beside the Archifane, it proved to be an unreliable ally. Whilst the Bale fleet of Ugalax the Soul Eater confronted the Farsight enclaves under orders of Abaddon upon the world of Arthas Moloch, the Despoiler oversaw the reconstitution of the Fel Key fragments within the Somnium Stars. Combating the Dark Angels upon their rebuilt world, once known as Caliban, upon the now demon world known as Wormwood, culminated the final battle of the campaign. Abaddon, Vashtor, and Angron beset Wormwood with all their remaining strength, yet as the battle reached its zenith, Lionel Johnson, by the side of his risen angels, descended upon the forces of Chaos. Supported by the Blood Angels, led by Lord Commander Dante, the Loyalists attempted to banish the pawns of the ruinous powers. The Lion spearheaded the battle, banishing the Red Angel. Yet for all the valor of the Loyalists, Abaddon and his allies carried the day, activating Wormwood as the final piece of the key to Vashtor's ambitions. For Abaddon, unlike his Genesire, is a patient war master. His carefully laid plans and alliances, 10 millennia in the making, slowly suffocating the life from his most hated Imperium. "He's dead," says Loken. "There's nothing left." Abaddon stares at him. His warplate is gouged and cracked, and his cheek is caked in dried blood. His sword hangs in his hand. His eyes are sunken and lost, his cheeks drawn, his skin pale and feverish. He looks exhausted and famished, as though stricken by some wasting disease. "Dead," he echoes. Loken nods.
Why are you here, Loken?
Abaddon asks. "I stayed with him," says Loken. "He was alone." "Not anymore," whispers Sykar. The master of the Justarin is edging to the left of Abaddon, and Baraxa is moving out to Abaddon's right. They intend to encircle him. Abaddon is simply gazing at his father's corpse. "No, not anymore, Hellas," says Loken. "His sons are with him. I think he would be grateful for that."
His sons, eh?
Sykar rumbles. "Yes," says Loken. "Do you intend to fight me, Sykar? More blood, after all that's been spent."
Your blood,
says Sykar. He has circled almost around to Loken's right flank, and Baraxa is now on his left. "We'll see, if we have to," says Loken. The master of the Justarin sees the look in Loken's eyes.
This traitor should not be here,
Sykar says to Abaddon. "Traitor," says Loken. He smiles. "Really? From your lips, Sykar?"
You know what you are,
says Baraxa. "I do. I absolutely do, Azelas. Do you?" Sykar begins his move, a telltale hum of his Terminator plate, as it powers for a lunge.
Stop,
says Abaddon.
Stop, Sykar. I said stop. You too, Baraxa. Just stop.
Baraxa lowers his blade, frowning. Sykar glares at the first captain, and then takes a step back. You want me for yourself then, Ezekiel? Says Loken. Abaddon draws near and takes a pace forward, face to face. They stare at each other. Abaddon shakes his head.
No,
He says,
no more killing. No more of it, Loken. There are far too few of us to turn on each other again.
I agree. Abaddon isn't really looking at him anymore. His gaze is fixed on his father's corpse.
You waited here?
He asks. As I said,
Yes, of course.
says Abaddon. He moves past Loken and kneels. He gently places his hand on his father's body.
That was the right thing to do. The respectful thing. A fine warrior is owed that, no matter what.
He shakes his head. He withdraws his hand.
Horus was a fool. Our father was a fool.
He was a puppet, Ezekiel. He was made a puppet. Chaos chose him and used him and discarded him.
Discarded him.
Yes, in the end.
Because he wasn't enough.
Because he was too much. He was the most terrible thing, Ezekiel. He was absolute and everything. But he was also Horus. He didn't want gifts and tributes. He didn't want to be a puppet or some pawn of the old four. He wanted to rule. He wanted control.
Control.
Abaddon replies sharply. He looks at Loken.
Control?
Loken nods. It was the one thing they wouldn't give him. Power, yes, but the authority to use that power, no. He was just a weapon to them, a weapon to kill the one thing that threatened them, a weapon to end the human race. They were never going to let us live. They were never going to let him rule anything.
And you know this?
Asks Saikar. I was there. Abaddon rises to his feet.
Then he was a fool,
He says.
He was a fool to have believed otherwise. I warned him. I feared for him. I tried to make him see sense. He wouldn't listen.
He was Horus Lupercal, says Loken. I loved him, Ezekiel. But it was never easy to tell him things when his mind was set, and he had not set his mind himself. He was no fool, but he was played for one. Abaddon makes no reply. Do not make the same mistake, Ezekiel.
I will not,
says Abaddon quietly.
I will not be made a fool. That is never going to happen to me.
Abaddon turns to him. He clears his throat.
I believed in the Imperium, and it betrayed me. I believed in my father, and he disappointed me. I will never be beholden to anything or anyone again. I will follow no one, no Primarch, no demon. I will lead.
Then lead wisely. And I ask you, Ezekiel, lead what? Abaddon stares at Loken for a second.
I have the authority now, Loken. As first captain, I am the heir to command. Do you oppose that?
No.
We are trying to right the ship, to make some running repairs and restart the drives.
That won't be easy. The damage is severe.
Indeed. Not easy at all, but the Vengeful Spirit has always been a resolute vessel. Strong, enduring. We have made a start. We will see how far we get.
That's your plan.
Would you advise differently?
I would advise surrender, says Loken. He hears Saikar snort.
We don't surrender, Loken.
No, but a coming to terms would be the best conclusion. There's nowhere to run, not in a wounded ship, and the forces that are coming for you are fired with vengeance. This war will persist until the galaxy ends, unless one side lowers its guard. Chaos is fled, it's gone. There will be others like you, Ezekiel, others of your cause who regret their actions, or who were misled and duped, or who have simply seen the error of their ways. But if the first captain of the 16th sets an example, they would follow you.
Guilliman will kill us,
says Baraxa. Guilliman wants the Imperium restored. He wants it whole again. I believe, if the terms were right, he would accept the return of Astartes' brothers and spare them. He doesn't want to lose 9 legions. There was a mistake, born of misunderstanding. Not all of your side are beyond redemption. So set an example. Begin the process. Bring others with you and demonstrate your contrition.
It's too late for that,
snaps Saikar. It's better that than the alternative. A crusade to hunt you all down, to exterminate you all, to scour you from the stars. This civil war, perpetuated under a new name. No mercy, no quarter, no forgiveness. Where would you even begin to run?
I'll think of somewhere.
Ezekiel.
Azaelis is right, Loken. Guilliman will kill us. He will never forgive what we have done. He will never accept that we were right and our grievances justified.
Guilliman wasn't here, but Dorn was. He understands it better. He might listen, and he is the Praetorian after all. Ezekyle, if you are prepared to commit to this course, truly prepared, I would go to him. I would speak to Dorn on behalf of the 16th. I would make your case and negotiate terms. I mean it. I will swear an oath to it if you want me to. He would listen to me. I know it.
You would do that?
I do it for my legion, and for the honor it once had. I would do it for our father, as he was before this darkness fell. Loken stares down at the corpse. And I think he would want me to. My life for Lupercal. I can't give it to him now, but I can give it to his memory. Abaddon is silent for a moment.
And if I decide to reject your offer? If I decide to fight on, will you oppose me?
I'm not in a position to, Ezekyle. Will you kill me?
No, Garviel. No, I won't. I can use all the brothers I can get.
I won't fight for you, and I won't run with you. And I will come after you, at your heels, and remind you, every hour of every day, that my offer still stands.
Some more, Neval.
Abaddon murmurs. So?
You were always the idealist, Loken. Always. I was the pragmatist. The legions built the Imperium, through blood and sacrifice, and the Emperor would have discarded us. He would have cut our throats to make way for the human ascendancy. They would have no Imperium but for us. The betrayal is unconscionable, and our outrage burns as bright as ever. I'm sorry. This is our time for pragmatism. We're going to run. Fight for our birthright. Fight for what is owed us. Fight for our lives if we have to. That's the way it is. My decision. You can come with us, or you can go. I won't stop you.
Loken sighs. He starts to speak. Blood comes out of his mouth in place of words. Eyes wide, he falls forward into Abaddon. Abaddon catches him and lowers him in horror to the deck.
What did you do?
Abaddon snarls. Erebus slides his aphame out of Loken's back and whips blood from the blade with a flick of his wrist. He opposed you from the start, says Erebus. He wasn't about to stop. He was a traitor to your legion. Abaddon rises. His sword comes up and jabs against the word-bearer's throat. Erebus does not flinch.
What did you do?
No, you are correct in that. I cannot claim to be your brother as this rabble can. I am not Lorgar's son. I am his father. You would do well not to forget it. The sons of the Emperor would each be molded by the environments and mentors of their homeworlds. Some would be raised on feral death worlds, teeming with deadly predators, whilst others would bask in the light of civilizations blessed with technology, culture, and community. Yet each Primarch would shoulder their own burdens, and most would not be fortunate enough to be raised by benevolent or kind fathers. For today, we shall elucidate the deeds of the man who would twist the son of the Emperor to the path of damnation, self-pity, and hubris. The Dark Cardinal of the Word-Bearers, Kor Phaeron. The Master of Mankind would craft 20 inheritors of his legacy to unite humanity across the stars. Individually gifted with traits beyond mortal attainment, the sons of the Emperor would be installed to lead the armies of the Angels of Death, to bring compliance to the galaxy, and pave the way for a universe united in purpose, peace, and prosperity. Yet with the intervention of the malevolent beings of the Warp, the sons of the Emperor would be cast across the galaxy and raised on disparate worlds. For one such child would descend upon the feudal world of Colchis, a planet steeped in superstition and zealotry. Ruled by the theocratic covenant of Colchis, religious piety would be the principle by which its members would attain supremacy. Unknowingly worshipping the ruinous powers and their acts of praise, the doomed peoples of Colchis would seek the guidance of the Covenant's priests for the favor of their so-called Great Powers. For among these puppets of chaos, a priest of the Covenant would champion the aggressive subjugation and conversion of his people, Khor Pharon. Exiled for his extreme methods from the capital city of Varadesh, Khor Pharon would gather his remaining followers and venture to the nomadic tribes of the planet, seeking new converts to his cause. Among the peoples known as the Declined, Khor Pharon would meet with a boy of immense potential. Named Lorgar, the boy known as the Raincaller would project an aura of the Emperor's power, to which Khor Pharon would exploit. Ordering his followers to slaughter the nomads of the Declined, Khor Pharon would adopt Lorgar into his caravan of cultists and mentor the boy in the teachings of the Great Powers. Physically and emotionally abusive to the young boy, Khor Pharon would instill the tenets of the Covenant under Lorgar. Seeing visions of a figure wreathed in gold, Lorgar would proclaim his foresight of the one god of mankind to his guardian. Rejecting the notion of such hallucinations, Khor Pharon would berate Lorgar for his blasphemous ideas. Yet with time, Lorgar's immense charisma, honed through the teachings of the Old Faith, would begin to draw followers to his cause. Known as the Godsworn, the disciples of the now matured prophet of the Emperor would listen reverently to Lorgar's promise of the One. Khor Pharon would relent in his scorn of Lorgar's visions, by virtue of the followers now flocking to his side. Manipulating Lorgar to achieve his own ambitions, Khor Pharon's control would over time nonetheless diminish. His men would no longer acquiesce to beat Lorgar for his transgressions against his guardian and refuse to punish their now ascended prophet. Proclaiming his son as the bearer of the word, Khor Pharon would aid his foster son in his holy war against the old ways of the Covenant of Colchis. Serving as Lorgar's chief advisor, the now Archdeacon of Colchis would watch Lorgar's Godsworn overwhelm the rule of the Covenant and form his own Dark Heart branch of the faith in secret. Bearing no allegiance to Lorgar's vision, Khor Pharon would wait and gain influence until an opportunity to restore the faith of the Great Powers would present itself. Varadesh would fall to the Godsworn as the populace hurled the corpses of the former ruling ecclesiarchs and hierarchs from the walls of the City of Grey Flowers. Colchis would universally praise the teachings of the one God of humanity, and Khor Pharon would be installed as the new High Priest of the Covenant. With further schisms fracturing the faith of Colchis, after 6 years of bloody war, the Great Purge of Colchis would begin. Colchis would praise the divinity of the Emperor as the old faith would be assimilated into the teachings of the One. For soon, their devotion would be rewarded with the arrival of the Master of Mankind to Colchis. Alongside the Cyclops of Prospero, Magnus the Red, the Emperor would descend upon Colchis. The peoples of the faith Lorgar had created would bow and weep at the sight of their divine patron's visage. The Emperor would impart the rule of the Imperial Heralds to his returned son, and with Lorgar reinstated as commander of the 17th, he would name them the Word-Bearers. Yet as the most promising warriors of Colchis would be installed among the ranks of the 17th, Khor Pharon would prove too old to undergo the procedures to ascend to the stature of an Astartes. Undergoing intense rejuvenat treatments and costly surgical bionic and gene-forged procedures, Khor Pharon would transform into a transhuman warrior. Regarded with distaste by his peers, the newly installed first captain of the Word-Bearers would be regarded by the 17th as a false Astartes. Deemed impure by the standards of the Space Marines of his own legion, Khor Pharon would regardless serve his legion as his Primarch's most esteemed subject. A fanatical and ruthless commander, Khor Pharon would not only fulfill the role as leader of the Legion's elite First Company, but also a chaplain, spiritual leader of the 17th. Eradicating humanity's enemies across the stars, the Word-Bearers would bring worlds into compliance and erect grand monuments dedicated to the worship of the Master of Mankind. Lorgar would pen the Lectitio Divinitatis as his legion preached the word of the One to the conquered foes of the Imperium. Yet such a contradiction to the Emperor's imperial truth would not go unpunished. With the word-bearer's slow and heretical progress during the Great Crusade, answered with reprisal. Monarchia, a hive city of immense splendor, crafted in devotion to the Emperor, would be the greatest symbol of Lorgar's deeds as a Primarch of the Imperium. The city cast in gold, ivory and marble would be an affront to the Imperium's ideals of secularism and human progress. Dispatching the 13th Legion, the Ultramarines, the Master of Mankind would order the Sons of Guilliman to tear down Lorgar's perfect city. Monarchia would burn as the Emperor used his psychic might to force the word-bearers to kneel and bear witness to their transgression. Rebuked for their zealous worship, the shamed Legion would be fertile ground for Corferon's chance to bring resurgence to the teachings of the great powers. Upon the word-bearer's flagship, the Fidelitas Lex, Lorgar would wallow in contemplative isolation for a solar month. Mourning the Emperor's censure for his actions, Corferon and the first chaplain, Erebus, would tend to their liege's broken pride. Corferon would proffer that if the Emperor would not accept his Primarch's praise, perhaps another Pantheon would prove more benevolent. Converting Lorgar to the dark gods of the old faith once more, the bearer of the word would pilgrimage into the Eye of Terror to converse with his new gods. Returning to real space, empowered with the favor of the ruinous powers, Lorgar would lead his word-bearers to bring new worlds into compliance, to covertly give worship to his new benefactors. Corferon would be named Master of the Faith for his unflinching loyalty and service to the old gods, for soon they would reveal their true allegiance to the gods of chaos, with the fall of the Emperor's most cherished son, Horus Lupercal. The War Master of the Imperium would betray the Emperor with his fall to the ruinous powers, and begin his great gambit to sunder humanity. Aware of the Emperor's reprisal for his actions, the Lupercal would task Lorgar with crippling their most dangerous foe, the Ultramarines, before revealing their duplicity to the Imperium. Already embittered towards the 13th, Lorgar would relish the opportunity to humble the Lords of Ultramar and order Corferon to muster a contingent of the Legion within the Culf system. Presenting themselves to be returned and humbled brothers-in-arms to the Ultramarines, the word-bearers would position their forces to enact their bloody betrayal. Slaying countless unarmed and unarmored Ultramarines as their blades struck without warning, the word-bearers would begin the now infamous Battle of Calth. Poisoning the system's sun and irradiating the planet of Calth, Corferon's forces would attempt to destroy the Ultramarines' Gloriana-class void ship, the Macragge's Honor, from within as they jettisoned Roboute Guilliman into the void of space. Unable to slay the Ultramarines' Primarch, nor destroy his flagship, Corferon would confront Roboute Guilliman personally. Wounding Guilliman with a shard of the corrupting anaphame, Corferon's endeavor to turn the Primarch of the Ultramarines to the traitor cause would be rewarded with the Lord of Ultramar tearing one of Corferon's transhuman hearts from his body. Retreating to his void ship, the Infidus Imperator, Corferon would tend to his wounds and flee from the now mobilized Ultramarines fleet. Yet Corferon's flagrant attack on the citizenry and defenders of Calth would demand retribution. Marius Gage, first chapter master of the Ultramarines, would be tasked by Roboute Guilliman to lead a task force to destroy the blasphemously named Infidus Imperator or False Emperor and bring Corferon to justice. Pursuing the fleeing word-bearers into the warp, the Macragge's Honor, now commanded by Gage, would not relent in its chase. Ashamed at his inability to defeat the Ultramarines' Primarch, Corferon would settle for the destruction of the Macragge's Honor and order his vessels to confront the larger warship. Infiltrated by the assault force of Aerion Merceror and outmaneuvered by the Ultramarines' vessels, the Infidus Imperator would be destroyed. Yet Corferon would escape judgment by carving a hole through reality using his shard of the anaphame. Transported to the demon world of Sikaris within the Eye of Terror, Khor Pharon would begin the fortification and formation of a base of operations upon the world destined to be the Legion's new homeworld. Yet despite the Dark Cardinal's assault of Calth and summoning of the Ruinstorm across the galaxy by Erebus, the Word-Bearers had failed to destroy the Ultramarines. For the remainder of the Horus Heresy, the now battle-scarred and fragmented forces of the 17th Legion would see few engagements in comparison to their traitor brethren. Lorgar would attempt to usurp the War Master of Chaos, and in the wake of his failure, the traitor war effort would fail. Horus Lupercal would be slain by the Master of Mankind, and the remaining traitor legions would retreat into the Eye of Terror. Humbled, shamed, and defeated, the traitor legions would devolve into war bands as their scattered shards of their former might remained a deadly yet diminished blight among the stars. Yet the Word-Bearers alone would remain a unified and resolute legion of the Dark Gods. Staging their forces upon their new homeworld of Sikaris, the Word-Bearers would continue to harry the Imperium and spread their profane beliefs to the innocents of conquered worlds. Installing Dark Apostles to lead the Word-Bearers' Dark Council, Khor Pharon would remold his legion to best fulfill the will of their malevolent patrons. Lorgar Aurelian would ascend to the form of a demon prince of chaos undivided, with the Word-Bearers renewed in purpose at the vindication of their liege's ascension. Foregoing command to conduct deep meditations, Lorgar has remained within the Templum Inficio for 10,000 years as Khor Pharon and Erebus wrestle for control of the Legion in his stead. Enacting wars of faith across the stars, the Word-Bearers, now led by their Dark Cardinal, slay and convert billions to fulfill their vision of a universe ruled by their pantheon. Forming the Brotherhood within the Word-Bearers' Legion, Khor Pharon would scheme to remove Erebus from power by staging a coup to reclaim the Legion, yet fail with the betrayal of the Dark Apostle, Marduk. Renouncing the Brotherhood, Khor Pharon would retain his leadership of the Word-Bearers, yet incur further animosity from Erebus. Launching chaos invasions within the Teledus system, Segmentum Solar, and Veritas subsector, Khor Pharon would forge temporary alliances with the Iron Warriors, Night Lords, and other minor Chaos Lords to further the objectives of his Legion. Housed within his artificer suit of Cataphracti pattern Terminator armor, the Terminus Consolarius, Khor Pharon continues to hold on to life with the favor of the gods of chaos and his own twisted desire to serve their whims. For the sermons of the Dark Cardinal continue to this day within the era Indomitus, much to the dismay of the Imperium and its most noble subjects.
Is it so wrong of me to walk the ways of a visionary, a seeker, rather than a simple soldier? What is it within my father that renders him so thirsty for blood? Why is destruction the answer to every question he is asked?
Khor Pharon clutched Lorgar's shoulder tighter.
Because, my son, he is gravely flawed. He is an imperfect god. We have all burned, down in the fire pits or from the brander's iron in the solitarium. We have all touched fire. It leaves scars even for us. We carry them proudly, with honor. But the scars we took that day on that battlefield, we bear only with shame and regret. They are a memorial in flesh, a physical reminder of everything we have lost. A burn even we Fireborn cannot endure without pain.
Amongst all legions of the Adeptus Astartes, it is not uncommon for the sons of the Legion's Primarchs to devote themselves entirely to their will. Loyalty is bred within his angels as their single most virtue to fight alongside and at the behest of their gene fathers. Whilst many sacrifice life and limb for their legion, there are legends of those whose sacrifices are made not only for the survival of their chapters or their battle brothers, but in some rare circumstances, for the enduring renewal and glory of their Primarchs. sacrifices such as Artellus Numion, first captain of the Salamander's First Company. Born on Holy Terror, Artellus Numion served within the Salamander's Legion of Adeptus Astartes as commander of the elite Fire Drakes Company. Commanding his Primarch Vulcan's Pyre Guard, Artellus would fight alongside his Primarch on numerous occasions, including the infamous Battle of the Istvan V Dropsite Massacre. Watching his legion be utterly decimated by the forces of the traitor Primarchs and their legions, Numion would nonetheless survive the betrayal. Organizing the retreat of the surviving forces of the Salamanders, Iron Hands, and Raven Guard aboard the warship Fire Ark, the forces aboard the Ark would conduct hit-and-run raids against the traitor forces for several months. Becoming the de facto chapter master of his legion, Artellus would be revered by his brothers as both the martial and spiritual leader of their fractured forces during the tumultuous months in the wake of their Primarch's supposed death. Numion's band of warriors would eventually be discovered by the Wordbearers Legion under the command of Dark Apostle Valdrek Elias on the planet of Trauis. Yet it is on this world that hope would be rekindled within the 18th Legion, with the arrival of Cabal Perpetual, John Grammaticus. Informing Artellus that the artifact known as the Fulgrite was located on the planet's surface, Grammaticus would tell the Loyalist forces that the Worldbearers sought the same substance under direct orders from their first chaplain, Erebus, a substance which would be vital in saving the Salamander's Primarch, Vulcan. The Salamanders would combat the forces of the 17th Legion. Carving a path to the Fulgrite, the Salamanders would obtain their prize. Yet Grammaticus in a sleight of hand would blind Numion and steal the Fulgrite away. Elias would injure Numion with a shot from his bolt pistol before being joined via warp portal by Erebus. Finding Grammaticus and the Fulgrite missing, the Dark Apostles would leave Trauis, and Artellus Numion would be left for dead. Artellus Numion would be taken prisoner aboard the Fire Ark by the Wordbearers Legion, until the intervention of the Ultramarines Legion forces led by Sergeant Aenid Thiel. Taken to the Ultramarine homeworld of Macragge, Numion would be reunited with many of his Salamander brothers, and as a fortuitous twist of fate, the remains of his Primarch. His Primarch seemingly dead after being scorched upon re-entry within Ultramar's atmosphere, Artellus would spiral into a deep depression, refusing the call to assume the mantle of the new master of the 18th Legion. After many days of solitude, Artellus would rekindle his legion's warrior spirit, embarking upon a heroic voyage to reunite his legion with their Primarch, Vulcan, on their homeworld of Nocturne. Traveling aboard the battle barge, Charybdis, the expedition of the Salamanders to return to their homeworld would be beset by the forces of the Wordbearers Legion and foul demons, with their unavoidable venture into the Ruinstorm. Facing insurmountable odds, the Salamanders would be saved by a psychic projection of the Primarch of the 15th Legion, Magnus the Red. Conversing with Numion, Magnus would test the captain of the Fire Drake's resolve, inquiring as to what sacrifices Artellus would be willing to give in order to resurrect his Genefather. The Salamander's expedition would break through the Ruinstorm, yet be pursued by a fleet contingent of the 14th Legion, the Death Guard. Attempting to invade and conquer Nocturne, the Death Guard invasion would be stalled by the Salamander's Legion, whilst Numion and his brothers interred Vulcan's body within Mount Deathfire. For a week, they would conduct their Promethean ritual, but to no avail. The final setback would bring forth the words of Magnus the Red to the forefront of Artellus's mind. Stripping his body of his armor, a mark of command, Artellus would depart from his brothers. Unflinching in his belief that his Primarch would rise again, Numion would cast himself into the crucible of Mount Deathfire, his sacrifice reawakening his Genefather and stoking the flames of rebirth for his legion.
We Salamanders are taught to be masters of our emotions. As such, we are not given to sudden bouts of apoplexy. But you risk the failure of that resolve if you try to convince me of my father's death.
He lies in state, a cold corpse in Macragge's deepest mausoleum. His sons maintain a vigil over his body.
Exasperated, Thiel shook his head.
Artellus,
but Numion would not hear it. He scowled, disgusted.
The word-bearer was a more gifted dissembler. He spoke of the Fulgrite, a weapon of immense power, capable of slaying an immortal Primarch. My Primarch. I reject you both. I deny these falsehoods, though I cannot fathom why a loyal son of Guilliman would manufacture such an obvious and heinous lie.
Anger and pity warred in Fiel's eyes as he met Numion's gaze.
You are not yourself, brother captain, so I shall overlook your insults. I speak truthfully, to the very best of my knowledge.
Then it is your knowledge that is flawed, Sergeant,
countered Numion, ending the conversation with a simple declaration.
Vulcan lives.
Ingo Peck served as the first captain of the Alpha Legion during the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy. Ingo would undergo surgical modification, alike to many of his brethren, to resemble his Primarch, Alpharius Omegan. Rumors tell that it was the first captain whom suggested to the Primarch of the 20th Legion to undergo the surgeries to strengthen the Legion's subterfuge. During the Cabal Perpetual John Grammaticus's mission to enlist the Alpha Legion to side with the Cabal's agenda to destroy the Ruinous Powers, Peck would be among the members of his Legion to impersonate his Primarch. Despite being one of Alpharius Omegan's closest advisors, Peck would be reassigned to serve under Harrowmaster Kel Silonius during the Battle of Pluto. Like many of his brethren's fates, his would remain unknown, though many speculate him to be slain impersonating his Primarch. Some even believe his death to be at the hands of Primarch of the Ultramarines Legion, Rebute Guilliman, though like many records of the 20th Legion, truth is oftentimes obscured.
This has been a tale of the Great Imperium of Man, read by the Remembrancer. Though few positions can rival that of the first captains, many were allured by the promise of power far beyond their already impressive reach. To be a leader of men, though replete with benefits, is regardless a burden to be carried, for the safety and prosperity of those you mentor are your responsibility alone. Do not mistake leadership for tyranny, for a true leader does not treat his subordinates as cattle nor tools, but as valued pieces of a cohesive whole. So should you hope to lead effectively, take stock of those who aid you in your endeavors, for their strengths, united in purpose, shall more than compensate for your own collective flaws.